Chapter 75. All the prodigies rushed towards the 18-mountain peak. Everyone's goal was the 4 dragon thrones in the center. As Shao Chun had been worried about Chun Ling, he was half a beat slower at the beginning. Therefore, Shao Chun was now the last. However, this didn't matter. After all, it wasn't a competition of speed. If one wanted to sit on the 4 dragon thrones, they would have to overcome all obstacles. Starting from the outermost 8 mountain peaks, they would have to fight their way through level by level until they finally defeated all the prodigies blocking their way. Only then would they be able to sit on the dragon thrones. The first round of battle broke out in the outermost 8 mountain peak. The winners could continue to advance, while the losers could only stay on the shortest 8 mountain peak. Following closely behind the crowd, Shao Chun soon arrived at the outermost 8 mountain peak. Without any intention of stopping, he directly chose to pass through. He had no interest in the outermost 8 mountain peaks, and the others were the same. However, it was obvious that a batch of people had to be eliminated here first. Therefore, everyone quickly found their opponents, and a fierce battle broke out. Everyone had found their own opponent. The victors could continue to advance, while the weak could only stop here. At this time, Shao Chun also met a prodigy. He was over 2 meters tall and had a body full of terrifying muscles. He blocked Shao Chun's path and pointed to a mountain peak beside him. "My name is Chun Man, and I come from the South Wind region. I think you shouldn't go any further. This mountain peak is very suitable for you, Chun Man, one of the 3 kings of the South Wind region." It was said that this person was born with divine strength and was a powerful physical cultivator. Among the 3 kings of the South Wind region, he was known as the Strength King. Facing Chun Man's obstruction, Shao Chun didn't have any intention of talking nonsense. He directly unsheathed his Qingyun sword and pointed it at the ground. He replied indifferently, "We'll know who it's suitable for after we fight. Maybe it's suitable for you?" Only one of them could continue to advance to the 6 mountains in the middle. The loser could only stop at the periphery. Hearing Shao Chun's words, Shao Chun let out a cold laugh. Without wasting any more time, he stomped on the ground and the ground instantly cracked. His entire body shot towards Shao Chun like a cannonball. "Little Qing, wait for me at the side." Shao Chun gestured for Little Qing to wait for him, and charged forward with his sword. Facing Chun Man, who was a body cultivator, Shao Chun did not have the slightest intention of retreating. He still chose to fight him in close combat. Everyone knew that the strongest aspect of a body cultivator was their ability to fight in close combat, especially for a genius like Chun Man. With his enormous strength and powerful body, close combat was definitely his forte. Facing Shao Chun's choice, Chun Man couldn't help but reveal a trace of excitement on his face. Facing Shao Chun's choice, Chun Man burst into laughter. "Haha, what an idiot! You actually want to fight me in close combat. You're courting death." In Chun Man's opinion, Shao Chun was simply too stupid. However, after hearing Chun Man's words, Shao Chun replied indifferently. "A body cultivator's close combat ability is strong, but don't forget that a sword cultivator's close combat ability isn't bad either. Don't tell me there aren't any sword cultivators in the South Wind region?" As soon as Shao Chun finished his words, the 2 of them had already engaged in a fierce battle. Facing Chun Man's pair of iron fists, Shao Chun's Qingyun sword danced in the air, as though it were dancing. While resisting Chun Man's attacks, he also looked for opportunities to counterattack. Chun Man originally thought that he could rely on his own strength to suppress Shao Chun. However, Chun Man obviously didn't expect Shao Chun's close combat ability to be so strong. Moreover, Shao Chun's body. He was a body cultivator, and the strength of his body was far superior to his peers. However, Shao Chun's body wasn't any weaker than his. Could it be that Shao Chun was also a body cultivator? She was surprised by the toughness of Shao Chun's physical body. Of course, Shao Chun had never actually practiced any body-refining martial arts since he was young. The reason why his physical body was so strong was all because of the drop of Shao Qing's blood essence. When Shao Chen broke through to the mysterious Ian stage and fell into a coma, little Qing integrated a drop of her blood essence into Shao Chen's body. It was this drop of blood essence that allowed Shao Chen's physical strength to be no weaker than Chen Man's. Of course, Shao Chen still didn't know about this because he was in a coma at that time. As a body cultivator, he didn't have any advantage in terms of physical strength. Chen Man's face gradually turned ugly. What kind of joke was this? A sword cultivator was actually able to compete with him in terms of physical strength. His aura had been raised to the extreme, and his attacks were like a flood. However, Shao Chen was still able to cope with Chen Man's crazy attack. In just 100 breaths, the two of them had already exchanged more than 100 moves. As the battle continued, Chen Man gradually fell into a disadvantage. In terms of strength, the two of them were evenly matched. In terms of physical strength, Shao Chen wasn't any weaker than Shao Chen. In addition, Shao Chen was a sword cultivator. Everyone recognized that sword cultivators had the strongest attacking power. Coupled with his unpredictable swordsmanship, Shao Chen's attacking power was indeed stronger than Chen Man's. Due to the fact that Shao Chen's attacking power was stronger and his physical strength didn't have any advantage, Chen Man gradually fell into a disadvantage. The more they fought, the more aggrieved he became. The sword shadows that filled the sky made Chen Man not dare to be careless. He knew that if this continued, he would definitely lose. Chen Man roared and his eyes flashed with determination. "Boy, you forced me to do this. Even if I didn't sit on the 4 dragon thrones, I would still stop you here today," as he shouted. The veins all over Chen Man's body bulged. His body, which was already extremely muscular, expanded once again. His bulging muscles gave off an extremely oppressive feeling just by looking at them. From a height of 2 meters, he grew to 3 meters. Looking at Chen Man's transformation, Shao Chen's eyes flashed with a strange glint. Secret art. He didn't expect Chen Man to have mastered a secret art. Unlike martial arts, the main function of a secret art was to squeeze out the warrior's potential. In a short period of time, it could increase the warrior's strength exponentially. However, there would be side effects every time the secret art was cast. Under normal circumstances, the secret art was used as a last resort to save one's life because once the secret art was cast, the caster would inevitably fall into a powerless state when the time was up. Seeing Chen Man use the secret method, Shao Chen knew that the guy had given up on the 4 dragon thrones. Even if he defeated Shao Chen, given the state of his body afterward, it was obvious that he would not be able to fight anyone else. He didn't hesitate to cast the secret art to stop me. A cold glint flashed in Shao Chen's eyes as he said indifferently, "You think you can stop me with the secret art?" Upon hearing Shao Chen's words, Chen Man shouted in a deep voice, "Beast Transformation, Seeking Collection, Recommendation, Reward." Chapter 76. Beast Transformation. Chen Man let out a low growl. At the same time, dense brown hair quickly grew on his body. At the same time, a tyrannical aura rose from his body. This is the aura of a monster beast. Shao Chen captured the aura of a monster beast from the aura that Chen Man exuded. A human with the aura of a monster beast. This was probably the effect of the beast transformation secret technique. He guessed that this aura might have come from the secret technique that Chen Man used, and it was indeed so. The secret technique that Chen Man used was called beast transformation. He obtained it by accident in an ancient land. He didn't know what grade it was, but it was very strong. There was only one function of beast transformation, which was to refine the monster beast's bloodline. It allowed the human to obtain a part of the monster beast's power in a short period of time while activating the secret technique. Moreover, the stronger the monster beast's bloodline refined, the stronger the power after beast transformation would be. In principle, beast transformation had unlimited room for growth because its power was determined by the strength of the monster beast's bloodline, refined by the caster. To put it simply, refining a Class 1 demonic beast and refining a Class 2 demonic beast would result in an incomparable amount of power after beastification. In order to cultivate beastification, Chun Man had refined the bloodline of a Class 3 demonic beast, the violent Northern Heavens Bear. In order to obtain the bloodline power of this violent Northern Heavens Bear, Chun Man had used all of his assets and even asked for help from his own sect. Only then had he succeeded. After successfully refining the violent Northern Heavens Bear's bloodline, Song Xian's strength had doubled during the time he was in his beast form. From this, one could see just how powerful this secret manual was. His eyes were filled with madness and his blood aura was incomparably tyrannical. Staring at Xiao Chen, Chun Man took the initiative to attack with a roar. He threw out an iron fist. Before the fist arrived, the strong wind blew and hurt Xiao Chen's cheek. He frowned slightly. He didn't expect Chun Man's strength to be so great after beast transformation. Raising his sword to block, Chun Man's fist fiercely hit the Qingyun sword. A huge force directly sent Xiao Chen flying. Chun Man's physical strength had been on par with Xiao Chen's before, but after using the secret technique, Chun Man's strength had completely crushed Xiao Chen's. This was the first time he had seen a secret technique. One had to know that secret techniques were very precious. There was not a single secret technique in the entire East Sword Pavilion. After retreating dozens of meters, Xiao Chen barely managed to stop himself. He looked at Chun Man with a grave expression. Very strong. Under the enhancement of the secret technique, Chun Man's strength had increased by too much. Under such circumstances, it would be very difficult for him to face him head-on. Chun Man was at a complete disadvantage in terms of strength. Chun Man didn't give Xiao Chen too much of a chance. Chun Man jumped up and attacked Xiao Chen again. There was a time limit to the shape-shifting. During this time, his strength had indeed been greatly enhanced, and he even possessed some of the abilities of a demon beast. However, once the time was up and he exited the shape-shifting state, Chun Man would be powerless for at least 3 days. By then, any warrior in the foundation stage could easily kill him, let alone Xiao Chen. Therefore, he had to finish the battle before the shape-shifting ended. Chun Man didn't give Xiao Chen the slightest chance to breathe. He relied on his overwhelming physical strength and ignored Xiao Chen's counterattack. He wanted to take down Xiao Chen in the shortest time possible. Chun Man's skin was rough and his flesh was thick. The Chun Man in front of him was a monster in human form. His fur was no different from the fur of the northern violent bear. It was as if Chun Man was wearing a layer of armor. Although his attacks could break through Chun Man's skin, they couldn't cause any substantial damage. Since he couldn't fight head-on, he could only stall for time. As long as Chun Man withdrew from the beast transformation, he wouldn't even need to make a move. With this decision in his heart, Xiao Chen also changed his fighting style. He no longer faced Chun Man head-on. Instead, he relied on the speed of the clear shadow steps to constantly contend with Chun Man. Seeing Xiao Chen's intention, Chun Man coldly shouted, "Do you think I will let you do as you wish? Lose for me." Chun Man shouted angrily. Then, he did something that Xiao Chen didn't expect. Facing his attack, Chun Man actually grabbed the Qingyun sword. Blood immediately flowed out from his palm, but Chun Man had no intention of letting go. He held the Qingyun sword tightly and ignored the injury on his palm. He really didn't expect Chun Man to be able to do this. The Qingyun sword was already held tightly by Chun Man. As such, Xiao Chen only had 2 choices left. He could either give up the Qingyun sword and retreat, or he could brace himself and face Chun Man head-on. Xiao Chen didn't have time to think. Of course, Xiao Chen didn't need to think. As a swordsman, how could he give up the sword in his hand? Seeing Chun Man's punch, Xiao Chen's eyes flashed with a hint of ruthlessness. "Do you think I'm afraid of you? It was impossible for him to give up the Qingyun sword. This was the pride of a swordsman. Since that was the case, he would face it head-on. Both of them threw out a punch at the same time. As expected, the two fists, one big and one small, collided violently in the air with a muffled bang. Everyone thought that Chun Man would definitely crush Xiao Chen with this punch. However, just as their fists collided, Chun Man felt that the violent northern bear bloodline in his body seemed to have suddenly seen something terrifying. It actually withdrew from the beast state uncontrollably. After forcefully withdrawing from the beast state, Chun Man, who didn't have the support of the secret technique, suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion rush over him like a flood. Under such circumstances, no one expected Xiao Chen to send Chun Man flying with a punch. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Chun Man was repelled by Xiao Chen and spat out a mouthful of blood. Until now, Chun Man still didn't understand how such a thing happened. Chun Man looked at Xiao Chen in confusion. Just now, Chun Man clearly felt that an inexplicable power had suddenly emerged from Xiao Chen's body. It was this power that had instantly suppressed the blood of the violent bear of the northern heavens in his body. It was as if it had seen something terrible, forcing him to withdraw from the beast state. You also have the bloodline of a monster beast? Chun Man asked in shock as he stared at Xiao Chen, who was slowly walking over. To be able to suppress his violent northern bear bloodline, the only explanation was that Xiao Chen also had the bloodline of a monster beast. Moreover, it was of a higher grade than the violent northern bear bloodline. Chun Man didn't understand what Xiao Chen was saying. How could he have the bloodline of a monster beast? Xiao Chen stepped in front of him and looked down at him. He said indifferently, "I don't know what you're talking about, but the winner takes all. You've lost. Hand over the secret technique, and I can let you go. Please collect recommend reward." Chapter 77. Xiao Chen had successfully defeated Chun Man. To be honest, Xiao Chen had no idea what was going on with that last punch. Chun Man had undoubtedly had the absolute advantage at first, but at the last moment, Chun Man had taken the initiative to withdraw from his beast form, which was why Xiao Chen had been severely injured by that last punch. Xiao Chen had some doubts in his heart. In addition, he had heard Chun Man say that he had the bloodline of a demonic beast. He had vaguely guessed something, but it was impossible. He had never refined any demonic beast bloodline, and he did not know the secret method of refining demonic beast bloodlines. How could he have the bloodline of a demonic beast? Xiao Chen looked at Chun Man and said flatly. It wasn't the time to dwell on these questions. Upon hearing that Xiao Chen wanted the secret method to transform into a beast form, Chun Man's expression sank. Dream on, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the secret method was one of the reasons why Chun Man became one of the 3 kings of the South Wind region. If he only relied on his physical strength, perhaps it would be impossible for him to become one of the 3 kings of the South Wind region. It was due to the secret method that Chun Man was able to keep pace with the other 2 kings of the South Wind region. Now that Xiao Chen wanted him to hand over the secret method, Chun Man naturally wouldn't agree. Xiao Chen wasn't angry at Chun Man's rejection. Instead, he smiled and said, "Are you sure? Since that's the case, I can only kill you and take it myself." He didn't hide his threat at all. Chun Man was taken aback. Then, he sneered. "Kill me? Xiao Chen, do you dare to kill me? I'm one of the 3 kings of the South Wind region." He didn't think that Xiao Chen would dare to kill him. However, before Chun Man finished his sentence, Xiao Chen interrupted him. "You think that I don't dare to kill you? Heh, do you still not understand the current situation? You've already been defeated by me, and those people from your sect are all outside the 100 Spirits graveyard. Even if I were to kill you, who would be able to stop me? Besides, after leaving the 100 Spirits graveyard, do you think that your sect will travel thousands of miles from the South Wind region to the East Sun region to seek revenge on me for a dead person? Cut the crap, Chun Man. I'll give you 3 breaths of time to hand over the beast transformation technique. Otherwise, I'll do it myself. Chun Man was stunned when he heard Xiao Chen's words and felt a faint killing intent spread out. His intuition told him that Xiao Chen absolutely dared to kill him. He had no other choice. Compared to his own life, the secret beast transformation technique was naturally not that important. Although his heart ached in order to survive, Chun Man still handed over the secret beast transformation technique. He kept the beast transformation mystic technique into his storage ring. Now wasn't the time to study it. Once he left the 100 Spirits graveyard, he would naturally have plenty of time to concentrate on cultivating. As for now, it was better to focus on the upcoming Heaven's Pride battle. Not bad, Xiao Chen said to Chun Man with a smile. He ignored the gloomy look on Chun Man's face and stepped forward. Chun Man could only stop there and had no choice but to choose the outermost peak. Once again, he climbed onto Xiao Chen's back. With little Qing in tow, Xiao Chen continued to rush towards the 6 peaks in the middle. Xiao Chen's battle had already been decided, and the other battles of the other Heaven's Pride battle had also come to an end. Some people had stopped here, while others continued to advance triumphantly. Soon, Xiao Chen arrived at the 6 peaks in the middle. If he wanted to pass through here, he would have to pass through these 6 peaks. He glanced around and randomly chose one of the peaks. Xiao Chen climbed all the way to the top of the mountain. There was already a genius waiting there when Xiao Chen arrived. It was apparent that he had also defeated his opponent in the first round and made it to the top. What surprised Xiao Chen was that the young man was also a swordsman, with a long sword hanging at his waist. He didn't expect to meet a sword cultivator like himself. Seeing Xiao Chen reach the peak, the young man turned around and took the initiative to speak. I know you. You're the demon sword of the 5 dragons of the Eastern Sun region. I heard that you're a genius in the sword Dao. Very good, I've been wanting to have a battle with you for a long time. The young man in a luxurious golden robe said indifferently. Upon hearing the young man's words, Xiao Chen gave Little Qing a look, and Little Qing understood and hid to the side. Then, Xiao Chen looked at the young man and said indifferently, I've heard of you as well. You're one of the 6 supremes of the northern mountain region, Sword Supremacy Mu Bai. Both of them were sword cultivators and were known to be the most talented in the sword Dao in their respective regions. Now that they had met, they didn't waste any time talking. Both of them were filled with strong battle intent. Both of them had heard of each other's names. As they stood facing each other, the 2 long swords hanging on their waists seemed to have sensed their master's battle intent and let out sword cries. Their eyes met, and in the end Mu Bai proposed, since we're both sword cultivators, why don't we compete in sword Dao? Both of them were sword cultivators, so there was no problem in competing in sword Dao. Hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded in agreement. Sure, they were both quite young, not even in their 20s. However, neither Mu Bai nor Xiao Chen had ever met anyone who could defeat them in terms of swordsmanship. That being said, the authorities of the older generation were not included in the list. At the same time, they drew their own swords. There was no fluctuation of spiritual energy on their bodies. Since they had agreed to compete in sword Dao, there was no need to use spiritual energy. Almost at the same time, they took a step forward and drew their swords at the same time. The tips of the swords collided with each other, and the powerful force caused the swords to bend slightly. Stab, flick, hack, slash, and other basic sword techniques were displayed to perfection by the 2 of them. There was no terrifying might, nor was there any gorgeous martial skill. It seemed to be an ordinary confrontation of sword techniques, but anyone with a discerning eye knew that this kind of confrontation was the most dangerous. Because as long as the opponent caught the slightest flaw, it was possible to lose the whole game. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the 2 of them were not even 20 years old, but their sword Dao had already made many experts of the older generation feel ashamed. For example, the people of the East Sword Pavilion, who were watching the battle through the light mirror, shook their heads helplessly. The sword Tao of these two kids has already surpassed this old man's, regardless of cultivation, in terms of swordsmanship. The two of them had indeed surpassed the ordinary elders of the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Moreover, the two of them were not even 20 years old yet. It was hard to imagine what level their swordsmanship would reach when they reached the age of these elders. Would a single sword be enough to connect the heavens? The elders of the East Sword Pavilion were secretly disappointed. They had immersed themselves in sword Tao for so many years, yet in the end, they were still inferior to two kids who were not even 20 years old. This was indeed a bit too much of a blow to them. Xiao Chen didn't know that his sword Tao would cause such a huge blow to the elders. At this moment, the two of them were using their sword Tao to fight. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he actually discovered that his sword Tao was full of flaws. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 78. Xiao Chen was surprised to find so many flaws in his swordsmanship when he fought against Mu Bai. After all, this was a basic swordsmanship. Xiao Chen had always attached great importance to the basics since he was young. He had been practicing the basic swordsmanship every day. Even now, Xiao Chen would spend at least an hour practicing the basic swordsmanship every day. However, the basic swordsmanship that he had been practicing since he was young, and even Song Xian had praised it, was now full of flaws in his eyes. At first, Xiao Chen thought it was just his imagination, but as he continued to practice, the feeling became clearer and clearer. In the end, he was sure that it wasn't his imagination at all. The basic swordsmanship that he had been practicing for more than 10 years was really full of flaws. He had never had such a feeling before. He originally thought that his basic swordsmanship was perfect, but now it seemed like that wasn't the case. Xiao Chen couldn't understand why he had such a feeling. After a moment of doubt, he suddenly remembered the Heaven's Path sword embryo. He separated a strand of his consciousness to look at his glabella. He discovered that the Heaven's Path sword embryo was emitting a faint platinum glow. Could it be the Heaven's Path sword embryo's doing? Was it pointing out the mistakes and flaws in his swordsmanship? He wondered. Xiao Chen didn't know much about the Heaven's Path sword embryo, because it was something that only existed in legends. In the entire heavenly Qin continent, apart from Xiao Chen, no one had seen the Heaven's Path sword embryo with their own eyes. Therefore, most of the descriptions of the Heaven's Path sword embryo were just guesses. Due to his lack of knowledge about the Heaven's Path sword embryo, Xiao Chen didn't know that his comprehension had improved by leaps and bounds after awakening the Heaven's Path sword embryo. The basic swordsmanship that he once thought was perfect was now full of flaws. Perfect swordsmanship. One had to know that there was no such thing as perfection in this world. When one thought that something had reached perfection, it could only be said that one's talent had reached the limit. With one's talent, one could only comprehend up to this point. One couldn't comprehend anything further, which was why one thought it was perfect. It was like a frog at the bottom of a well. Being at the bottom of the well, it couldn't see how vast the world was. Therefore, it could only think that the sky in its eyes was everything. With the help of the heavenly sword embryo, his sword Tao comprehension had undergone a qualitative leap. Furthermore, such talent would continue to evolve as the heavenly sword embryo grew. "Brother Mu Bai, can you wait for a moment?" Xiao Chen said to Mu Bai, his mind in a mess. Xiao Chen suddenly asked him to stop in the middle of the battle. Mu Bai was confused, but he still chose to stop after seeing Xiao Chen's expression. Mu Bai had no idea what Xiao Chen was up to. Xiao Chen stood alone in the same spot after the temporary truce. His eyes were hollow. Mu Bai looked at Xiao Chen thoughtfully when he saw the look on his face. Xiao Chen stared at the Heavenly Path sword embryo, which was glowing with a faint white light. Gradually, he seemed to only be able to see himself and the Heavenly Path sword embryo. At the same time, a very vague but very clear voice slowly sounded in his mind. "What is a sword? What is Tao? What is the way of the sword? The people of the world are ignorant. They think they have comprehended the way of the sword after cultivating for a few hundred years. Little do they know, they haven't even crossed the threshold of the way of the sword. The path of the way of the sword is vast and boundless. Only those who truly widen their horizons and stop looking at the sky from the bottom of a well will understand that there is no such thing as perfection in the world. Do you really think your way of the sword is perfect after practicing the basic sword arts for dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of years? Ignorant. The voice echoed in Mu Bai's mind. Xiao Chen seemed to have come to a realization after hearing the words. At the same time, Xiao Chen began to practice the basic sword arts without him noticing. Xiao Chen, who was initially standing in the same spot, suddenly began to practice the basic sword arts. Mu Bai was even more confused when he saw Xiao Chen practicing the basic sword arts over and over again. The confusion in his eyes gradually turned into astonishment as he watched Xiao Chen practice the basic sword arts over and over again. The basic sword arts can be used like this? Mu Bai didn't notice anything strange at first, but since he was one of the 6 supremes of the Northern Mountains region, he was naturally talented. He soon noticed that Xiao Chen's basic sword arts were improving. Xiao Chen's basic sword arts were improving in all aspects. Even with Mu Bai's experience, he couldn't help but be entranced by the performance. He was astonished. The basic sword arts can be used like this? I see, I understand now. I shouldn't blindly pursue speed when thrusting my sword. Mu Bai also came to a realization after watching Xiao Chen's practice. However, compared to Xiao Chen, his improvement was obviously much slower. After improving the basic sword arts, Xiao Chen continued to practice the other basic sword arts, such as Shadow Strike, Scorching Flame Sword, and Golden Killing Sword. Xiao Chen's practice greatly improved these basic sword art. Xiao Chen gradually returned to his senses after 2 hours. His eyes flickered with excitement. Only Xiao Chen himself knew how much he had benefited in the past 2 hours. There's no such thing as a perfect sword art. There's no strongest sword art, only stronger. So that's how it is, Xiao Chen murmured. He turned to Mu Bai and said apologetically, "Brother Mu Bai, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's continue." Xiao Chen had benefited a lot from the 2 hours of enlightenment. Not only did his sword arts improve on the surface, but it also improved his state of mind, as well as his understanding of sword arts. He signaled Mu Bai to continue. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Mu Bai sheathed his sword and shook his head with a wry smile. "There's no need for that. I'm no match for you in terms of sword arts. Brother Xiao Chen, if it's possible, can you tell me what you learned just now?" Mu Bai had no intention of continuing the fight. He knew that he was no longer Xiao Chen's opponent after the enlightenment. Xiao Chen's attainments in sword arts had already surpassed his. In just 2 hours, Xiao Chen's sword arts seemed to have been cleansed of all its impurities. It had improved qualitatively and was completely different from before. Even though Mu Bai knew he was no match for Xiao Chen, he was not pessimistic. He was not ashamed to ask Xiao Chen about it. It was obvious that Mu Bai had a good temperament. He was able to face his own shortcomings and grasp any opportunity to improve himself. Only a person like him would be able to go far on the path of sword art. Xiao Chen smiled after hearing Mu Bai's words. Nothing is perfect in this world. There is no strongest in the path of sword arts, only stronger. Don't be a frog in a well. It was a simple sentence, but it perfectly expressed his understanding. Mu Bai was stunned after hearing Xiao Chen's words. He repeated the words repeatedly. After a while, Mu Bai collected his thoughts. His eyes flickered with joy as he bowed to Xiao Chen. "Thank you for your guidance, Brother Xiao Chen. Mu Bai is very grateful. Please collect, recommend, reward." Chapter 79. Mu Bai came to a realization after hearing Xiao Chen's word. At the same time, he was even more impressed by Xiao Chen. He had no idea how Xiao Qin managed to comprehend it. It seemed like a simple principle, but even the older generation of sword masters failed to comprehend it. Yet, Xiao Qin managed to do it. Mu Bai sincerely thanked Xiao Qin. He was sincerely convinced. As a sword cultivator, he wasn't as good as Xiao Qin. Whether it was in terms of talent or temperament, Xiao Qin was far superior to him. Mu Bai chose to admit defeat without any hesitation. Xiao Qin smiled at him and strode toward the 4 peaks in the center. Mu Bai was completely convinced. Not only that, but the spectators who were watching the battle through the mirror were also overjoyed, especially the sword cultivators. Although they couldn't hear the conversation between the two of them, many sword cultivators learned a lot from the series of sword techniques Xiao Qin demonstrated, especially the basic sword technique that everyone knew. It was a complete sublimation in Xiao Qin's hands. This kid's talent in sword Dao. After a long while, a sword master from the older generation murmured. He wanted to praise Xiao Qin, but he couldn't find any words to describe Xiao Qin's talent in sword Dao. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the basic sword technique that Xiao Qin demonstrated was a level that many sword masters of the older generation couldn't reach. However, Xiao Qin had achieved it when he wasn't even 20 years old. I'm afraid Qin Er's talent in sword Dao is stronger than we imagined. At least in terms of understanding the basic sword techniques, I'm not as good as him, Song Xian said. Even Song Xian admitted that he wasn't as good as Xiao Qin in terms of understanding the basic sword technique. Upon hearing his words, Song Yun and Song Long nodded in agreement. The fact that Xiao Qin was able to sublimate the basic sword technique once again, and all of this was done by himself, showed how talented he was. Unaware that the outside world was shocked because of him, Xiao Qin finally arrived at the 4 peaks in the center after successfully breaking through the 6 peaks in the middle. Unlike the peaks in the periphery and the middle, the 4 peaks in the center were in the shape of a staircase. Although the 4 peaks looked the same from afar, when one stood at the foot of the mountain, one would realize that there was actually a difference between the 4 peaks. Starting from the first peak, each peak was taller than the other. The 4 peaks were engraved with the same word, 4 Kings of Pride, meaning that they were the kings of the 4 regions' geniuses. Their eyes were fixed on the highest peak. However, they still had to pass through the 3 peaks in front of them in order to reach it. It was like climbing a staircase. Although the 4 of them who could reach here were enough to be called the King of Heaven's Pride, there was still a need to determine who was better. And this would depend on who could reach the highest peak. Just as Xiao Qin was sizing up the 4 proud king peaks, the other 3 proud kings arrived one after another. Including Xiao Qin, there were 4 of them in total. They were all king-level figures who had fought their way through the 18 proud kings. Each of them had successfully broken through the obstacles of the other proud kings and stepped on the bodies of others to reach the proud king peak. Next would be the battle between the proud kings. Eastern Sun Region's Demon Sword Xiao Qin, West Sea Region's Thunder Emperor Gu Lei, North Mountain Region's Flame Reverend Su Mu, and South Wind Region's Barbarian King Huang Gu. These 4 were the 4 kings of the geniuses who had successfully reached the peak. Next would be the battle between the 4 of them to determine the ranking of the 4 kings of the geniuses. They arrived at the foot of the proud king peak one after another. When the 4 of them gathered, they looked at the other 3. Xiao Qin had already met Gu Lei, the Thunder Emperor, and even fought him. He did not expect Gu Lei to be able to make it this far. Aside from Thunder Emperor Gu Lei, Xiao Qin had never seen the other 2 kings of the geniuses, Flame Reverend Su Mu and Barbarian King Huang Gu. Su Mu was dressed in a fiery red robe and his figure was a little skinny. However, his bright red hair was extremely eye-catching. Compared to Su Mu, Huang Gu was even more exaggerated. If the Herculean king, Chun Man, whom he had met previously, was already considered to be muscular, then this primordial age before him was simply a monster. Although Huang Gu was only 2 meters tall, The muscles on his body were even more exaggerated than Chun Man's when he was in his beast form. In addition, Huang Gu's body constantly emitted a dense blood aura. Judging from the density of the blood aura, Huang Gu's strength was definitely far beyond Chun Man's. Even if Chun Man had transformed into his beast form, he would still be no match for Huang Gu. The four of them were sizing each other up. However, they did not know that the four of them were all possessors of special constitutions. Huang Gu possessed the barbaric tyrant body, Su Mu possessed the scarlet flame body, Gu Lei possessed the purple lightning body, and Shao Chun possessed the heavenly sword embryo. They were all possessors of unique physique. It could be said that without a unique physique, one would not be able to become a king of geniuses. This was because people with unique physiques had an innate advantage in cultivation. After sizing each other up for a while, Huang Gu was the first to speak. The four King of Geniuses peaks will depend on our own abilities? The four King of Geniuses peaks were also divided into different levels. As such, the four of them naturally wanted the highest peak. Upon hearing Huang Gu's words, Su Mu smiled and said, "Then let's depend on our own abilities. You talk too much nonsense. I'll make a move first." Ignoring Huang Gu and Su Mu's conversation, Gu Lei snorted coldly and strode towards the first King of Geniuses peak. Seeing that Gu Lei had already made his move, Shao Chun and the other two smiled and followed closely behind Gu Lei towards the first King of Geniuses peak. There was a bluestone staircase leading from the foot of the mountain to the top. As soon as everyone stepped onto the staircase, a terrifying pressure swept over them. The competition between the four King of Geniuses peaks had long been decided by the sovereigns. There were powerful restrictions on the path to the top, and these restrictions were personally set up by the sovereigns. Starting from the first King of Geniuses peak, the strength of the restrictions would increase with every peak they passed. When they reached the fourth King of Geniuses peak, the restrictions would reach their peak. If they wanted to step onto the four King of Geniuses peaks and sit on the four dragon thrones, they would have to withstand the pressure of the restrictions. At the same time, the weakest among the four would naturally have to choose the King of Geniuses peak. Such a test didn't just test their battle strength and willpower. More importantly, they had to know when to give up. For example, if you could only withstand the pressure of the first King of Geniuses peak, but you insisted on forcefully stepping onto the second King of Geniuses peak, there was a high chance that you would fail. Once you failed, you would even lose the chance to step onto the first King of Geniuses peak. As such, the four of them had to clearly understand where their limits were. Trying to be brave would only result in losses that would not be worth it. In the end, they would end up with nothing. Please add recommend reward. Chapter 80. The four of them stepped onto the first Proud King's peak one after another. As they continued to advance, the pressure on their bodies grew increasingly greater, as though each of them was carrying a mountain on their backs. Every step was extremely strenuous. It was no exaggeration to say that any other supreme genius apart from the four Proud Kings would not be able to withstand such pressure, let alone reach the peak. Damn it, this is only the first Proud King's peak. Gu Lei muttered under his breath as he struggled to climb. This was only the first Proud King's peak, but the pressure was already so immense. It was hard to imagine just how great the pressure would be on the second, third, and even the final Proud King's peak. Could anyone reach the peak under such pressure? Previously, he had planned to find an opportunity to strike down Shao Chen's trio while climbing the mountain. However, he was already struggling to withstand such pressure, so how could he spare any energy to launch a sneak attack on the others? Similar to Gu Lei's thoughts, Shao Chen's trio also planned to find an opportunity to launch a sneak attack on the others while climbing the peak. However, after feeling the pressure of the restriction, they had no choice but to give up on this idea. They were already doing their best to deal with the pressure, so they simply could not spare any energy to do anything else. Although the path did not seem long, the four of them took a total of 6 hours to successfully reach the peak. The only fortunate thing was that the first Proud King's Peak did not eliminate anyone, and all four of them successfully reached the peak. The pressure of the restriction quickly disappeared after reaching the peak. The four of them panted heavily as they looked towards the second Proud King's Peak. The top of the first Proud King's Peak was connected to the middle of the second Proud King's Peak. Similarly, there was a flight of blue stone stairs. Although the distance was not long, the four of them no longer dared to look down on this short flight of bluestone stairs. After resting for around 15 minutes, the four of them gradually recovered with the help of the medicinal pills. However, no one expected that Gu Lei would actually choose to give up. When climbing the first Proud King's Peak, Gu Lei had already given it his all and had no choice but to activate his purple thunder body. As such, Gu Lei truly did not have the confidence to continue climbing the second Proud King's Peak. Even an idiot would know that the pressure on the second Proud King's Peak was definitely greater than the first. Once he failed the second Proud King's Peak, it would mean that he had lost the qualifications to become a Proud King. Gu Lei did not dare to take the risk. At the same time, even if he did, there was not much hope. Therefore, he might as well choose the first Proud King's Peak. He glanced at the three of them and sat down on the dragon throne expressionlessly. Xiao Chen and the other two did not pay much attention to Gu Lei sitting on the first dragon throne of the Proud King's Peak. They were different from Gu Lei, as they still had to continue with their challenges. They continued to challenge the next Proud King's Peak. Gu Lei's expression was a little ugly in the face of their gazes. However, he did not say anything. To be able to sit on the first Proud King's Peak's dragon throne, Gu Lei had already surpassed the other geniuses. He could even be called the strongest genius in the West Sea region. After all, Xiao Chen's group were not from the West Sea region. Clearly, Xiao Chen's group did not want to stop at the first Proud King's Peak. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Chen took the lead and stepped onto the limestone steps leading to the second Proud King's Peak. Seeing this, Huanggu and Su Mu followed closely behind. Since one person had already chosen to give up, there were only three left to compete. On the limestone steps leading to the second Proud King's Peak, the three of them were still under immense pressure. Step by step, they resolutely walked forward. After passing through the limestone steps leading to the second Proud King's Peak, Xiao Chen's group successfully reached the silver steps leading to the peak. That's right, the steps leading to the second Proud King's Peak were no longer made of limestone. Instead, they were made of silver. This was probably to show that the second Proud King's Peak had a higher status than the first Proud King's Peak. Just as they stepped onto the silver steps, Xiao Chen's group instantly saw a huge wave of spiritual energy pouring down from the top of the second Proud King's Peak and violently rushing towards them. Spiritual energy impact. Su Mu involuntarily cried out in surprise. He never expected to encounter a spiritual energy impact on the second Proud King's Peak. Its might was far from what the first Proud King's Peak's pressure could compare to. Seeing the spiritual energy pouring down from the top of the mountain, not only did Xiao Chen's group of three change their expressions, but everyone in the outside world was also stunned. That's impossible, right? How can a mysterious Yuan stage cultivator withstand a spiritual energy impact? Someone said in disbelief. While everyone was talking, the first wave of spiritual energy had already arrived in front of Xiao Chen's group of three. In response, the three of them raised their aura to the maximum and firmly held onto the ground, as if their feet were rooted to the ground. Boom! The first wave of spiritual energy finally arrived in front of the three of them. Under the impact of the spiritual energy impact, their bodies swayed, but their feet didn't relax and firmly held onto the ground. They couldn't relax at all. Once they were swept away, it meant that they had failed. While resisting the powerful spiritual energy impact, Xiao Chen's group of three stared at the top of the second Proud King's Peak. After a full 100 breaths, the spiritual energy on the top of the mountain gradually weakened. It was obvious that this wave of spiritual energy impact was about to end. The three of them were waiting for the moment when the spiritual energy disappeared. The moment the first wave of spiritual energy impact disappeared, Xiao Chen's group of three moved at the same time and rushed forward like ferocious tigers. In order to pass through the second Proud King's Peak, there were two key points. First, they had to withstand the spiritual energy impact. Second, they had to seize the gap between each wave of spiritual energy impact and climb to the top as quickly as possible. After all, every wave of spiritual energy impact would consume more of Xiao Chen's group of three's energy. If their energy was completely depleted, needless to say, they would definitely be swept to the bottom by the spiritual energy impact. Without any hesitation, they increased their speed to the maximum and rushed to the top of the mountain. However, in less than 10 breaths of time, the second wave of spiritual energy impact fell from the sky. Sensing the second wave of spiritual energy impact, Xiao Chen's group of three stopped at the same time. They once again circulated their spiritual energy and firmly held onto the ground to withstand the second wave of spiritual energy impact. One shouldn't underestimate this spiritual energy impact. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even a warrior at the mysterious Ian Perfect stage might not be able to withstand this spiritual energy impact, not to mention Xiao Chen's group of three, who were at the mysterious Ian initial stage. Furthermore, the three of them didn't only need to withstand one wave of spiritual energy impact. Judging from the interval between the two waves of spiritual energy impact, the three of them would need to successfully withstand at least 8 waves of spiritual energy impact in order to reach the top. Moreover, they couldn't encounter any unexpected changes in the process. Otherwise, the three of them would have to withstand even more. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 81. After withstanding wave after wave of spiritual energy impacts, Xiao Chen and the other two quickly rushed to the top of the second peak while taking advantage of the gap between each wave of spiritual energy impact. They were about to reach the top of the mountain. They were only 10 meters away from the top and could succeed in a flash. However, in the last 10 meters, Xiao Chen and the other two were stuck. 200 breaths of time had already passed, but this wave of spiritual energy was still not over. Previously, each wave of spiritual energy only lasted for 100 breaths of time, but now 200 breaths of time had passed, and this wave of spiritual energy still showed no signs of stopping. At the same time, Xiao Chen and the other two quickly came to their senses. Could it be that, in the last 10 meters, they had to withstand the impact of the spiritual power while moving forward? It was very likely. In other words, in the last 10 meters there would be no space for the three of them to sprint forward. The three of them could only forcibly withstand the spiritual power to reach the top. Thinking of this, the three of them secretly complained. It was already difficult to stand in the same place. Now they still had to withstand the spiritual power to reach the top. Once they let go of their feet, it was very likely that they would be swept away. It was extremely difficult, but there was no way out. A look of determination flashed in their eyes. Xiao Chen and the other two simultaneously lifted one foot and climbed up. Bearing the huge pressure of the impact of the spiritual power, the three of them walked for a quarter of an hour before finally reaching the top of the mountain. At the last moment, Sumu even almost fell down, but in the end, he stabilized himself and stepped on the top of the second peak without any mishap. The three of them successfully stepped onto the second peak. Seeing this scene, Gu Lei, who was on the first peak, looked even more terrible. As usual, he sat cross-legged on the second peak and recovered as soon as possible. After half an hour, the three of them opened their eyes one after another. At this time, Sumu took the initiative to speak. "I give up. What do you two say? Do you want to compete with me for the second peak?" Sumu did not intend to continue climbing the third peak. Just now, he was almost eliminated. It was also due to some luck that he successfully stepped onto the second peak. Therefore, at this time, Sumu directly chose the dragon throne of the second peak. Upon hearing Sumu's words, Xiao Chen smiled. You don't have to consider me. I won't compete. I won't fight for it either. The second summit is still a little short. I want to check out the third summit, Ancient Primordial said. Upon hearing their words, Sumu snorted. Humph, act according to your capabilities. Don't go for wool and come home shorn. Shao Chen and the Ancient One had no intention of giving up. Naturally, Sumu was unhappy. They were both King of Heaven's favorites. He had chosen to give up, but Shao Chen and the Ancient One still wanted to challenge him. Didn't this mean that these two were stronger than him? There was a hint of mockery and jealousy in his words. However, Shao Chen and the other man ignored him and stepped onto the silver stairs leading to the third peak. Just like the first peak, the silver staircase on the second peak was also connected to the third peak. Along the way, they resisted the impact of the spiritual energy and quickly arrived at the golden steps of the third peak. As soon as they stepped onto the steps, the golden steps of the third peak burned with raging flames. The temperature was so high that Shao Chen and the Ancient One couldn't help but frown slightly. These were definitely not ordinary flames. The temperature was too high. After breaking through the mystic Ian stage and attaining the mystic spirit martial body, it could be said that Shao Chen and the Ancient One's bodies were invulnerable to fire and water. Ordinary flames couldn't hurt them at all. However, before the flames could even touch them, the two of them already felt unbearably hot. This is the Burning Sky Ruler's raging flames. As the restriction on the third peak was activated, the people in the outside world quickly recognized the origin of the flames. The Burning Sky Ruler, one of the 7 rulers of the heavenly stellar continent, was extremely powerful. The Burning Sky Ruler's raging flames were the most frightening thing about him. It was said that even Tao Validation Realm powerhouses would be incinerated instantly. Of course, the Burning Sky Ruler's raging flames on the third peak were only formed by a wisp of the Burning Sky Ruler's flame. Its power wasn't even 1,000th of the real Burning Sky flame. But even so, it was still extremely difficult for Shao Chen and the Ancient One to pass through the third peak. One must know that with the Burning Sky Ruler's cultivation, and with Shao Chen and the Ancient One's cultivation, it was impossible for them to pass through without extraordinary means. Raging flames enveloped the entire third peak. After standing outside the golden steps for a long time, Shao Chen finally chuckled and said, "Since we're already here, we can't give up no matter what. Brother Ancient One, I'll make a move first." Sensing the terror of the Burning Sky Flame, Shao Chen had no intention of giving up. As soon as he finished speaking, Shao Chen stepped onto the golden step. Seeing Shao Chen's actions, the Ancient One took a deep breath and followed closely behind. The two of them, one at the front and one at the back, forcefully endured the burning of the raging flames as they walked towards the peak. At the beginning, the two of them were still able to persevere. However, after walking half the distance, one could clearly see that large areas of burns had appeared on their bodies. Even though it was only formed by a wisp of flame, its power was enough to pose a fatal threat to Shao Chen and the Ancient One. They gritted their teeth. There was no way they could pass through the third peak through any trick. The only way was to give it their all. Enduring the excruciating pain in his body, Shao Chen had already raised the level of minor consummation sword aura to the extreme. However, under the burning of the sky-burning flames, even the minor consummation sword aura found it difficult to resist. However, after just a short distance, the sword aura that was protecting him had already become tattered. The injuries on his body were getting worse and worse, but Shao Chen's eyes were still filled with determination as he thought to himself, "We're already here. How can I give up? This is only the third peak. If I want to fight, I must fight for the best. I must reach the fourth peak and sit on the highest dragon throne." The third peak wasn't his destination. His goal was the fourth peak. Since he wanted to fight, he must fight for the best. This was Shao Chen's obsession. Following closely behind Shao Chen, the Ancient One's eyes were also filled with determination. Perhaps he was influenced by Shao Chen, but at this moment, The only thing in his eyes was the dragon throne at the top of the third peak. I must sit on it. From the beginning of the competition between the four proud kings to now, only Shao Chun and the Ancient One remained. Gradually, the two of them got closer and closer to the top of the mountain. Finally, under the eyes of the world, the two of them reached the top of the third peak one after another. After successfully passing through the burning sky flame, the two of them didn't even have time to celebrate. As soon as they reached the top, the two of them immediately consumed medicinal pills to heal their injuries. Their bodies were covered in burns and the pain was unbearable. Please add recommend reward. Chapter 82. This time, it took a total of 4 hours for Shao Chun and Gu Mu to fully recover from their injuries. Looking at the golden steps leading to the fourth peak, Huanggu shook his head helplessly. He no longer had the confidence to continue the challenge. At the same time, Shao Chun slowly walked towards the golden step. It was apparent that Shao Chun still wanted to continue. Shao Chun, you. Huanggu stared blankly at Shao Chun's back. This guy still wants to continue? That's impossible. The third peak's heaven-incinerating flames almost killed them. How could Shao Chun still want to continue the challenge? Not only was Huanggu stunned, but Gu Lei and Su Mu, who were on the second and first peaks, also stared at Shao Chun with complicated expressions. That guy still wants to continue? Is he really going to ascend the fourth peak? Brother Shao Chun, do what you can. If you fail, you won't even have the chance to become the King of Pride. Huanggu tried to persuade Shao Chun. In his opinion, Shao Chun definitely didn't have the chance to ascend the fourth peak. However, Shao Chun's reply stunned Huanggu. In my eyes, there is only one King of Pride peak, and that's the one before me. If I can't ascend it, I'd rather not have the title of King of Pride. As soon as Shao Chun finished his sentence, he strode towards the fourth peak while Huanggu stood blankly on the spot. Arrogance. Boundless arrogance. Shao Chun's reply was filled with arrogance. If he couldn't ascend the fourth peak, he'd rather not have the title of King of Pride. If that was the case, then what were the three of them? Gu Lei from the first peak, Su Mu from the second peak, and Huanggu from the third peak. Weren't the three of them kings of pride? Huanggu looked at Shao Chun with a complicated expression. He had to admit that he didn't have Shao Chun's confidence, nor did he have Shao Chun's courage. In this aspect, he was inferior to Shao Chun. Huanggu sighed softly and did not say anything else. Since Shao Chun did not want to compete with him for the third peak, he directly sat on the dragon throne of the third peak. He looked at Shao Chun with a complicated gaze. Shao Chun walked towards the fourth peak, but strangely, he didn't encounter any obstacles on the golden stairs from the third peak to the fourth peak. He easily reached the middle of the fourth peak, and there weren't any stairs or paths that led to the top of the fourth peak. It's slightly strange. It's different from the other three peaks. While Shao Chun was pondering in his heart, a young man in a beautiful thundercloud robe slowly appeared at the peak of the fourth peak. When the young man appeared, the crowd went crazy. They stared at him and stuttered, "Nine. Ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds." Many people recognized the young man immediately. He was one of the 7 rulers of the Tianshan continent, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. This time, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds wasn't a clone of his godly awareness, it was his real body. His real body landed on the fourth king's peak and looked at the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. Everybody looked at him in awe and veneration. Among the 7 rulers of the Tianshan continent, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds was the most famous one because he was only 500 years old. He was one of the 7 rulers of the continent of the 9 clouds when he was only 500 years old. He had the highest chance of becoming stronger. He had founded the 9 Clouds Palace, and in 500 years, he had already become one of the 7 most powerful groups of influence in the Tianshan continent. It could be said that the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had only used 500 years to do what the other 6 rulers had done in 1,000 years. At the entrance of the 100 Spirits graveyard in Dongyang region, Song Xian and the two others looked at the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds with mixed emotions. They looked strange, as if they knew the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. But was that possible? He was wearing a beautiful thundercloud robe and his hair was as black as ink. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at Shao Chen indifferently. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds spoke slowly. I didn't think anyone would dare challenge the 4th peak, so it's a bit too difficult. Now I can give you a chance to return to the 3rd peak. That way you'll have a chance to become a king of proud geniuses. He wanted to give Shao Chen a chance to regret his decision. However, Shao Chen shook his head and refused without hesitation. I won't back off. He had already come so far, how could he return? The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds smiled when he heard Shao Chen. Then, a flight of stairs appeared in front of Shao Chen and led him to the top of the 4th peak. All right, let's start, said the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds indifferently. Shao Chen took a deep breath and looked at the dragon throne at the top of the 4th peak. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds was standing in front of the dragon throne. Then, he stepped onto the first flight of stairs. Fall! Shouted the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds when Shao Chen stepped onto the first flight of stairs. Then, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky. When the crowd saw that bolt of lightning, they couldn't help but cry out in astonishment. Godly thunder of the 9 clouds, it's actually godly thunder of the 9 clouds. Godly thunder of the 9 clouds was the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds' signature attack. Surprisingly, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds was using his real body. Could Shao Chen pass that test? When the first bolt of lightning fell, Shao Chen coughed up blood and was severely injured. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds saw that, he said, "What do you think? You can still give up now." He gave Shao Chen another chance to give up, but Shao Chen flashed and stepped onto the second flight of stairs. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds saw that, he shook his head and shouted again. The second bolt of lightning fell. There were a total of 9 stairways, corresponding to 9 heavenly thunders. No one knew how much time had passed, but every time a bolt of heavenly lightning struck down, it was as if it struck the hearts of the people, causing everyone to tremble violently. When Shao Chen stepped onto the last step of the stairway to heaven, the entire heavenly Chen continent seemed to have fallen into silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the severely injured and dying figure on the screen. Nobody had thought that Shao Chen would be able to make it this far. Shao Chen had resisted 8 bolts of lightning. Even though the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had controlled his strength, he couldn't underestimate the power of the lightning bolt. Everybody was staring at Shao Chen. They wanted to see if Shao Chen could make it to the 4th peak. You're not bad, but you won't succeed. 8 bolts of lightning, the first one will destroy your physical body. The second one will destroy your mental state. The third one will seal your spiritual consciousness. The fourth one will destroy your soul. The fifth one will destroy your 3 souls. The 6th one will destroy your 7 physical bodies. The 7th one will destroy your sword. The 8th one will destroy your confidence. Now you're worse than a cripple. You won't be able to pass the last one. For example, right now I haven't even attacked, and you already don't think you'll be able to withstand the 9th bolt of lightning," said the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds slowly. Even though he was sure Shao Chen wouldn't be able to pass the 4th peak, he was still satisfied. Shao Chen had done well. Please add me to your collection, recommend me, reward me. Chapter 83. Shao Chen had already surpassed the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds' expectations. Even though Shao Chen had suppressed his godly lightning to the level of the mysterious origin layer, Shao Chen still couldn't block it. But in the end, Shao Chen had still managed to make it this far. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds couldn't help but have a whole new level of respect for him. In the eyes of the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, Xiao Chen's talent and tenacity weren't any weaker than those from the central region. In the 4 regions, Xiao Chen was the only one who could do that. After resisting 8 bolts of lightning, Xiao Chen was like a living corpse. His consciousness, state of mind, and physical body had all been destroyed. Xiao Chen didn't reply to the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. His eyes were empty, but he continued walking forwards. Xiao Chen had already come this far, but he still did not want to give up. Someone finally mumbled as they watched Xiao Chen take a step toward the peak through the light mirror. His consciousness, state of mind, and physical body have all been destroyed. Why is he still persisting? Many people didn't understand why Xiao Chen was still persisting. When Song Xian and the other sword masters heard those people's doubts, they seemed to understand something. Because Sword Dao is courageous and indomitable. That's the motto of all sword cultivators, but how many people can do that? But Xiao Chen is different. He can do it. Even though he's facing the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, he can't let his sword heart be covered in dust. He can't disgrace his sword. For the sake of his sword Dao, Xiao Chen couldn't shrink back. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds saw Xiao Chen, he was surprised. He hadn't thought that Xiao Chen would still be so determined. Luo. He was very satisfied with Xiao Chen, but he didn't intend to go easy on him. He was a ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, so he didn't intend to go easy on him. If he was strong enough, he could reach the top of the continent of the 9 clouds. If he wasn't strong enough, he could only blame himself. The 9th heavenly thunder fell, and its power was much stronger than the previous 8. Looking at the last heavenly thunder, everyone in the outside world shook their heads helplessly. It was unstoppable. Not to mention Xiao Chen's current state, even if he was in his peak state, he would not be able to withstand the last heavenly thunder. Is there still no way to reach the top? Song Xian softly muttered as he looked at the lightning in the mirror. Everyone was certain that Xiao Chen would not be able to block the final bolt of lightning. However, just as the bolt of lightning was about to strike Xiao Chen, a sword cry resounded through the sky. The voice seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. Along with this voice, everyone saw that Xiao Chen, who had already lost consciousness, had actually pulled out the Qingyun sword and pointed the tip of the sword directly at the 9 heavens' divine thunder falling from the sky. The body of the sword vibrated in a frenzy, and the sound of the sword reverberated in Xiao Chen's ears. It was as if the sword was trying to express its dissatisfaction. At the same time, the sword embryo between Xiao Chen's eyebrows burst with a dazzling white light, illuminating Xiao Chen's mind from within. As if it was waking Xiao Chen up, Xiao Chen's eyes gradually regained their color. At that moment, it seemed as if he and the Qingyun sword in his hand had become one. He could clearly feel the heroic spirit of the Qingyun sword. It was as if it was telling Xiao Chen that as long as it was in his hand, even if it was the heavens, he could still fight. Under the influence of the Qingyun sword, the despair in Xiao Chen's heart receded and was replaced by a soaring heroic spirit. Xiao Chen looked straight at the heavenly thunder descending from the sky and laughed heartily. With a sword in hand, the heavens and earth can be destroyed. Haha! Along with that roar, Xiao Chen's entire body seemed to have transformed into a gigantic sword that collided with the final bolt of lightning. Man and sword as one. The ruler of the 9 heavens said with great interest as he watched Xiao Chen regain his consciousness at the last moment. With his eyesight, it wasn't difficult for him to see that Xiao Chen's current state was the man and sword as one that all sword cultivators dreamed of. The dazzling light instantly enveloped the entire 4th peak, making it impossible for anyone to look at it directly. After more than 100 breaths, the light began to fade. How is it? Did Xiao Chen make it through? As the light began to fade, everyone stared fixedly at the top of the 4th peak. They couldn't wait to know the final result. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Xiao Chen finally stepped onto the peak of the 4th peak after the light faded away. He had finally succeeded. Although Shao Chun had only taken 2 steps before fainting, and the Qingyun sword in his hand had shattered from the collision, Shao Chun had finally succeeded in reaching the top of the 4th peak. He had become the leader of the 4 proud kings. He fainted in front of the ruler of the 9 heavens. Looking at the unconscious Shao Chun, the ruler of the 9 heavens smiled faintly. "What an interesting little fellow!" Saying that, the ruler of the 9 heavens slowly stretched out his right hand and a gentle spiritual energy slowly lifted Shao Chun up. At the same time, he fed Shao Chun a white, jade-like pill. That pill was called the 100 Reincarnation Pill. It was a Tian-level pill, extremely precious. However, the ruler of the 9 heavens didn't hesitate to give it to Shao Chun. After taking the 100 Reincarnation Pill, Shao Chun's injuries healed quickly. Then, the ruler of the 9 heavens looked deeply at Shao Chun and disappeared. Shao Chun had succeeded in reaching the top of the 4th peak, so the ruler of the 9 heavens had finished his mission. However, after this encounter, the ruler of the 9 heavens was very interested in this young man. Maybe in the near future, he would meet him in the central region. After the ruler of the 9 heavens left, Shao Chun woke up an hour later. When he saw the empty 4th peak, Shao Chun smiled. He had finally succeeded. He had succeeded in reaching the top of the 4th peak. He didn't care where the celestial zone of the 9 heavens had gone. After all, people like him were extremely mysterious. He stood up and sat down on the dragon throne of the 4th peak. When Shao Chun sat down on the dragon throne of the 4th peak, beams of light shot up to the skies from the 4 peaks of proud kings. The 4 peaks of proud kings already had a leader, so the 4 kings of proud kings of the 4 regions were determined. The West Sea region's Thunder Emperor Gu Lei was the 4th king of proud kings. The North Mountain region's Fire Zun Su Mu was the 3rd king of proud kings. The South Wind region's barbarian king Huang Gu was the 2nd king of proud kings. The East Sun region's bewitching sword Shao Chun was the leader of the 4 kings of proud kings. The light pillar soared into the sky. At the same time, within the light pillar, the shadows of Shao Chun and the other 3 slowly condensed. Each shadow was hundreds of meters tall. Clearly, this was the technique of the rulers. At the same time, the light pillar did not only appear in the 100 spirits' graveyard. The shadows of Shao Chun and the other 3 also appeared in the sky of the heavenly Chen continent. Everyone in the heavenly Chen continent could clearly see the 4 of them. Please add me to your collection, recommend me, reward me. Chapter 84. At this moment, the heavenly Chen continent was shrouded in the radiance of Shao Chun and the other 3. The 4 kings of pride were the kings among the sky prides of the 4 regions. Even in the golden age of sky prides, Shao Chun and the other 3 were still kings. Along with the appearance of the 4 silhouettes, an old voice spread to every corner of the heavenly Chen continent. Gu Lei of the West Sea region is ranked 4th among the 4 kings of pride and has been bestowed the name Thunder Emperor. Su Mu of the North Peak region is ranked 3rd among the kings of pride and has been bestowed the name Flame Sovereign. Huang Gu of the South Wind region is ranked 2nd among the kings of pride and has been bestowed the name Barbarian King. Shao Chun of the East Sun region is ranked 1st among the kings of pride and has been bestowed the name Demon Sword. In addition, a statue of Shao Chun will be erected in the Heaven's Pride Palace from today onwards for the world to worship. Hearing this voice, all the warriors in the heavenly Chen continent revealed a look of envy. The owner of this voice was definitely from the 7 sovereigns. The sovereigns bestowed names. No one expected that Shao Chun and the other 3 would be bestowed names by the sovereigns. One had to know that although the Sky Prides had their own titles in the past, they weren't recognized. Now that the sovereigns bestowed names, it meant that Shao Chun and the other 3's titles were recognized by the sovereigns. From today onwards, no one in the heavenly Chen continent would dare to use Shao Chun and the other 3's titles. In other words, from today onwards, the demon sword only represented one person, and that was Shao Chun. In addition to bestowing names, the 7 sovereigns also wanted to erect a statue of Shao Qin in the Heaven's Pride Palace. This made everyone envious to the extreme. What kind of place was the Heaven's Pride Palace? It was the place where the sky prides of the heavenly Qin continent were enshrined. It was built by countless overlords of the heavenly Qin continent and had a history of hundreds of thousands of years. Anyone who could have a place in the Heaven's Pride Palace was definitely a famous figure in the heavenly Qin continent. After hundreds of thousands of years, there were only 320 statues in the Heaven's Pride Palace. Nearly half of these statues had become the sovereigns of the heavenly Qin continent. This showed how valuable the Heaven's Pride Palace was. Currently, the 7 sovereigns of the heavenly Qin continent had their own statues in the Heaven's Pride Palace. Shao Qin also occupied a place in the Heaven's Pride Palace. For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Shao Qin, including the 3 sovereigns. It was a great honor for the leader of the 4 prided kings to have his own statue placed in the Heaven's Pride Hall. However, this was not the end. Just as the voice slowly faded away, the divine sense avatars of the 7 rulers slowly appeared in the sky above the 4 prided kings' peaks. All of them looked at Shao Qin. One of them casually waved his hand, and a crimson long sword descended from the sky, stabbing into the ground in front of Shao Qin. This sword is called Scarlet Edge, and it was forged by this old man many years ago. Its grade has reached the top of the earth rank. You should be able to barely use it now, so I'll give it to you, Scarlet Edge Sword. When the crowd heard the ruler's words, they quickly guessed his identity. The ruler of the 10,000 weapons. It's actually an earth-rank precious weapon personally forged by the ruler of the 10,000 weapons. They hadn't thought that the ruler of the 10,000 weapons would personally bestow a precious sword on Shao Qin. The Scarlet Edge Sword was definitely a famous precious sword in the heavenly Qin continent. It was known as the strongest earth-rank precious sword. They didn't know how to describe their current feelings. First, the ruler had bestowed him a name. Then, they'd entered the Heaven's Pride Palace. Now, the ruler of the 10,000 weapons had bestowed the Scarlet Edge Sword, the first earth-rank sword. The Qingyun sword had already shattered when resisting the godly lightning of the 9 heavens. Shao Qin didn't know that the ruler of the 9 heavens had bestowed the Scarlet Edge upon him. Shao Qin had already met with the ruler of the 9 heavens, but he didn't know what the ruler of the 9 heavens had said to him. In the end, the ruler of the 10,000 weapons had agreed to give the Scarlet Edge to Shao Qin. Looking at the Qifeng sword in front of him, Shao Qin's eyes flashed with excitement. The attraction of a treasured sword to a swordsman was unquestionable, and the Qifeng sword, no matter how one looked at it, was not something that the Qingyun sword could compare to. This was a true treasured sword. After bestowing the Scarlet Edge sword upon Shao Qin, the ruler of the 10,000 weapons said indifferently, "The 4 Regions Prodigy Tournament has come to an end. Within 3 days, all of you will receive a reward from the Central Divine Region." The 4 Regions Prodigy Tournament had come to an end. When it was time to leave, all the prodigies looked at Shao Qin. Then, everyone was transported out of the 100 Spirits Graveyard and returned to their respective regions. After returning to the Eastern Sun region from the 100 Spirits Graveyard, Shao Qin, Mu Qing, Zhao Weiyun, and Lin Xing appeared. Mu Qing and the other 2 were obviously ignored. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shao Qin. It couldn't be helped. Compared to Shao Qin, Mu Qing and the other 2's performances were ordinary. Mu Qing and Zhao Weiyun only occupied the outermost mountain peak. Although Lin Xing successfully occupied a mountain peak in the middle, his performance was still not outstanding enough compared to Shao Qin's. Many people wanted nothing more than to rush up to Shao Qin. Fortunately, there were people from the East Sword Pavilion to hold them back. They walked up to Shao Qin with a gratified expression. Even Song Xian was a little emotional as he said, "Qin'er, you did well after defeating all the prodigies from the 4 regions and becoming the leader of the 4 great pride's kings." Shao Qin's performance was indeed impeccable. Moreover, following Shao Qin's stunning performance, the reputation of the East Sword Pavilion soared. It was no exaggeration to say that the 3 words East Sword Pavilion had spread across the entire heavenly Chen continent. Xiao Chen smiled in response to Zhang Xian's praise. Then, he unconsciously looked in the direction of the Blood Demon Hall. Xiao Chen was a little worried when he didn't see Chen Ling at the Heaven's Pride 18 Peak. However, now was not the time to ask. He could only return to the East Sword Pavilion and send someone to the Blood Demon Hall to inquire about Chen Ling. Xiao Chen followed the people of the East Sword Pavilion. Under the gazes of many Eastern Sun region cultivators, he left the burial grounds and returned to the East Sword Pavilion. When Xiao Chen and the rest arrived at the East Sword Pavilion, all the disciples and elders of the East Sword Pavilion spontaneously came to welcome them. Xiao Chen, the true dragon of the East Sword Pavilion, was now the leader of the 4 great prides. He stood at the pinnacle of the Heaven's Prides in the 4 regions and suppressed all the other exceptional Heaven's Prides in the 4 regions. After jumping off the back of the green feather eagle and seeing Xiao Chen, the disciples respectfully greeted him. "Greetings, senior brother Xiao." Even the core disciples respectfully addressed Xiao Chen as senior brother. Although Xiao Chen was not yet a core disciple, they believed that it would not be long before Xiao Chen caught up to them. Therefore, everyone wholeheartedly acknowledged him as senior brother. That night, the entire East Sword Pavilion celebrated. Outer disciples, inner disciples, core disciples, and all the elders gathered at the square outside the main hall of the East Sword Pavilion to drink and play to their heart's content. After the 4 regions' Heaven's Prides battle, Xiao Chen's eye-catching performance had made the East Sword Pavilion the #1 faction in the Eastern Sun region. Because Xiao Chen had suppressed all the Heaven's Prides from the 4 regions, everyone felt that the East Sword Pavilion could become the #1 faction in the Eastern Sun region and suppress the other 4 giants. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 85. It was a night of revelry. Xiao Chen was naturally the star of the night. However, Xiao Chen did not really like this kind of occasion. Although the wine was good, to Xiao Chen, if 4 or 5 of his friends drank together, it would indeed be very happy. However, if there were too many people, it would seem a little dull. Because of this, Xiao Chen only dealt with them for a while before returning to his own dustless residence. Afterwards, Mo Jie, Qin Heng, Qi Yan and the rest of his friends also came to the dustless residence. Everyone began to drink here. They were all his few good friends. Drinking with them was obviously much more comfortable. There were no false pleasantries. Moreover, no one would change because of Xiao Chen's current status. This was what Xiao Chen liked the most. During this time, Xiao Chen also asked Qin Heng to inquire about Chen Ling. Qin Heng naturally would not refuse and agreed to arrange for a core disciple to go to the Blood Demon Hall tomorrow. While the East Sword Pavilion was celebrating, the geniuses of the Central Divine Realm did not participate in the 4 regions prodigy tournament this time. Therefore, they were not convinced of Xiao Chen's strength. Of course, it was not only them. Gu Lei and the other 2 were the same. Time passed day by day. After 3 days, the Central Divine Realm did indeed send rewards. There were various kinds of cultivation resources. Moreover, the 7 overlords did not just reward Xiao Chen this time. They also rewarded the East Sword Pavilion with many good things. With these things, the overall strength of the East Sword Pavilion would probably surpass the other 4 overlords very soon. And all of this was brought to them by Xiao Chen. Because of Xiao Chen, the East Sword Pavilion had received many benefits. As a result, Xiao Chen's position in the East Sword Pavilion had become even higher. When ordinary elders saw Xiao Chen, they were respectful and reverent. Even the 10 core elders treated Xiao Chen as if they were equals. They did not dare to slight him in the slightest. The entire East Sword Pavilion was thriving, and today, Qin Heng had also found Xiao Chen. Through his investigation, it was as if Chen Ling had disappeared from the face of the earth, and there was no news at all. They had already gone to the Blood Demon Palace to inquire, but Chun Ling had not returned. Now, the people from the Blood Demon Palace were also searching for Chun Ling's whereabouts. Chun Ling had disappeared. Regarding this, Xiao Chun said somewhat worriedly, "Chun Ling, where did you go?" It was certain that Chun Ling did not die in the 100 Spirits graveyard. If Chun Ling had really died in the 100 Spirits graveyard, then his corpse would have been sent out. However, no one had seen Chun Ling's corpse, so where did he go? For a while, Xiao Chun was at a loss. After that, Qin Heng told Xiao Chun another piece of news, which was that the Central Divine Realm was about to hold the Battle of Geniuses. In the previous 4 regions' Heavens Chosen battle, only the Heavens Chosen from the Eastern Sun Domain, Northern Peak Domain, West Sea Domain, and South Wind Domain had participated. The Heavens Chosen from the Central Divine Region did not appear. Now, the 7 great rulers had gathered the Heavens Chosen from the Central Divine Region to hold the second Heavens Chosen battle. When this news was released, it naturally attracted the attention of everyone in the Heavenly Chun continent. The Central Divine Region was the center of the Heavenly Chun continent, and it was also the place that all warriors yearned for. Everyone knew that the Central Divine Region had far more experts than the other 4 regions combined. At the same time, the number of publicly recognized Heavens Chosen in the Central Divine Region also far exceeded the total number of Heavens Chosen from the other 4 regions. There were a total of 30 top Heavens Chosen in the Central Divine Region. Not only was the Central Divine Region vast, but martial arts were also prevalent. Compared to the Central Divine Region, the other 4 regions were barbarians. Therefore, the upcoming Heavens Chosen battle in the Central Divine Region naturally attracted everyone's attention. Hearing about the Heavens Chosen battle in the Central Divine Region, Xiao Qin wasn't too interested because it had nothing to do with him. It was a matter of the Central Divine Region. After a moment of silence, Xiao Qin couldn't find any news about Chun Ling. Then, he asked about Qin Shuru. "Senior brother, do you know what happened to Shui Rou?" "Mu Qing has already come to propose marriage. The wedding has been confirmed to be in half a month." After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Heng didn't hide anything. Mu Qing actually dared to take the initiative to propose marriage. After hearing Qin Heng's answer, a cold glint flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. "It seems that the lesson I taught you in the 100 Spirits graveyard wasn't enough." He had already given Mu Qing a chance, but he insisted on courting death. He couldn't blame anyone else. With a cold glint in his eyes, Xiao Chen decided that in half a month, he would personally go to the Qin family and snatch Qin Shuru back in front of Mu Qing. Qin Heng looked at Xiao Chen with a complicated gaze. He knew what he was going to do, but he couldn't say anything to stop him. Mu Qing was from the Mu family, and the Mu family was one of the 7 overlords of the Heavenly Chun continent. The patriarch of the Mu family was one of the 7 overlords. Offending the Mu family was obviously not a wise thing to do. However, as Qin Shuru's brother, Qin Heng naturally didn't want to see Qin Shuru marry someone he didn't like. Therefore, Qin Heng was caught in a dilemma. He wanted to persuade Xiao Chen not to offend the Mu family, but he couldn't find a reason to do so, because Xiao Chen was doing this for his sister. There was still half a month before Qin Shuru's wedding. However, in Xiao Chen's heart, the wedding in half a month didn't belong to Mu Qing. It belonged to him and Qin Shuru. That's right, in half a month, Xiao Chen was going to marry Qin Shuru. With a decision in his heart, Xiao Chen decided to take advantage of the remaining half a month to go home. Riding on the green feather eagle, Xiao Chen returned to Lingshan Prefecture City on the same day. Seeing that Xiao Chen had returned, Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue were naturally overjoyed. They also knew about the 4 regions' Heavenly Prides battle, and that their son was now the leader of the 4 great prides. However, no matter how high Xiao Chen's achievements were, he was still their son. He told his parents about the incident with Qin Shi. When they heard that Xiao Chen wanted to snatch the bride, not only did Bai Ruyue not stop him, she even raised both hands in approval. Chen, you did the right thing. How can you give away your own woman? Since you like her, you should fight for her. Don't worry, mother will support you. When the time comes, your father and I will accompany you to the Qin family. Since you are going to get married, we naturally have to be there. In the courtyard, Bai Ruiyue held Xiao Chen's hand and said. Hearing this, Xiao Qing felt a little helpless. Was there still a mother in this world who supported her son snatching the bride? Although he felt a little helpless, Xiao Qing didn't stop him. After all, Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru were in love with each other. Since the lady liked him, as a man, how could he shrink back? The couple didn't stop Xiao Chen. Moreover, half a month later, the two of them accompanied Xiao Chen to the Qin family. Regarding this, Xiao Chen didn't refuse. After deciding to leave in 10 days, Xiao Chen didn't plan to return to the East Sword Pavilion and simply stayed at home. Regarding this, Bai Ruiyue was overjoyed. It was rare that Xiao Chen could stay at home for such a long time. Please add recommend reward. Chapter 86. Staying at home, Xiao Chen didn't become arrogant because he was the leader of the four prides. He understood that if one didn't advance on the martial path, they would fall behind. A complacent and lazy person would never be able to reach the peak of the martial path. Thinking back to the time when he had entered the mystical state of being one with the sword, he had the heavenly Tao sword embryo. As long as the heavenly Tao sword embryo transformed into a lifeblood divine sword, he would naturally enter the state of being one with the sword once the divine sword appeared. However, this could only be done after the heavenly Tao sword embryo completed its transformation. Before that, Xiao Chen could only rely on himself to comprehend the state of one with the sword. What was one with the sword? In layman terms, the man was the sword and the sword was the man. The sword moved according to the heart, and the sword pointed where the heart pointed. Of course, this was only a layman's explanation of one with the sword. Everyone had a different understanding of what one with the sword was. Comprehending the profundity of one with the sword, if he could master one with the sword, his strength would greatly increase. He was completely immersed in the cultivation of one with the sword. At the same time, the Central Divine Region's Prodigy Battle began. It wasn't as troublesome as the Four Regions Prodigy Battle. The previous rounds were abandoned and the Prodigy 18 Peaks began. Of course, this time, it was the 30 Peak. The 30 prodigies of the Central Divine Region would compete. The rules were the same as the Four Regions Prodigy Battle. However, there were 6 Prodigy King Peaks instead of 4. The Central Divine Region's Prodigy Battle lasted for 8 days before it finally ended. In the end, the 6 Prodigy Kings of the Central Divine Region appeared. Like Xiao Chen and the other 3, the 6 of them appeared in the sky of the heavenly Chen continent, allowing the world to clearly see their appearances. At the same time, as the number 1 Prodigy King of the Central Divine Region, he received the same treatment as Xiao Chen. His statue was allowed to enter the Prodigy Palace, and he also received an Earth-grade artifact from the Myriad Weapons Sovereign. It was worth mentioning that the number 1 Prodigy King of the Central Divine Region was named Guduwu. Like Xiao Chen, he was also a sword cultivator. Although they were both sword cultivators, one was the leader of the Four Regions Prodigy Kings, the other was the leader of the Central Divine Region's Prodigy Kings. Both of them entered the Prodigy Palace, suppressing the other 8 Prodigy Kings. Under the control of the 7 Juggernauts, the numerous prodigies who had appeared out of nowhere because of the Golden Age were divided into 3 classes. Then, the 7 Juggernauts released the prodigy ranking at the same time, clearly defining the 3 classes of prodigies. As for the 10 Prodigy Kings who reached the 10 Prodigy Kings peaks, they were called the Prodigy Kings. The Prodigy Kings were divided into 3 levels. Of course, Chunling was not included because he had disappeared and there was no news of him. While it seemed like there were only 3 levels, everyone knew that there was a 4th level, which belonged to Xiao Chen and Guduwu, both of whom were among the top 10 pride. Both of them vaguely showed signs of overpowering the other 8 prides, making them the 4th level. No one knew why the 7 sovereigns would divide the prodigy kings into different levels. But to the people of the heavenly Chen continent, it was indeed a topic of conversation. The 2 rounds of the prodigy battles were over. At the top of a mountain in the central divine region, there were clouds and mist. It was like a fairyland. A young man with a light blue sword stood proudly at the top of the mountain, looking down at the rolling sea of clouds. Next to him was a young girl in a white dress. She had a blissful smile on her face. "Senior brother, people are comparing you to Shao Chen. They have no foresight. How could Shao Chen be qualified to be compared to senior brother?" The young girl seemed to be fighting for justice for the young man. She pouted as she spoke. She looked very cute. When the young man heard her, he smiled and said, "Shao Chen is indeed extraordinary. He and I both passed the test of the ruler's godly thunder of the continent of the 9 clouds. I also used all my strength to pass. Since he passed, it proves his strength. I've also heard that he can fuse with his sword. I really want to meet him." Unlike the young girl, the young man seemed to be very interested in Shao Chen. If one knew the young man's identity, one would understand why he cared so much about Shao Chen. Because he was Guduwia, the number 1 prodigy king of the central divine region, who was constantly being compared to Shao Chen. Guduwia didn't have any intention of looking down on Shao Chen. He even hoped that Shao Chen would become stronger. Very few people knew about Guduwia's past. Originally, he wasn't called Guduwia. He had changed his name when he was 16. From a young age, Guduwia had displayed unparalleled talent. No one in his generation could compete with him. Therefore, he had changed his name to Guduwia. Just like Shao Chen, he was 19 years old. Guduwia had always been looking for someone who could compete with him. He had thought that the geniuses of the central divine region would be able to give him a good fight. Unfortunately, Guduwia was disappointed. Even geniuses of his generation couldn't give him a good fight. Guduwia looked at the sky and said indifferently, "Shao Chen, can you give me the fight I've always wanted?" Upon hearing Guduwia's words, the girl beside him nestled in his arms and said, "Senior brother, since you want to meet Shao Chen so much, why don't we go to the Eastern Sun region?" "No, I'll wait for him to come to the Central Divine region. This is our stage. The Eastern Sun region is too small," Guduwia replied. Guduwia was looking forward to meeting Shao Chen for the first time. On the other side, Shao Chen, who was in Lingshan Commandery City, looked at Emojia helplessly and said with a bitter smile, "You came all the way from the Sword Pavilion just to tell me this?" "Of course. This is an important matter. Naturally, I have to tell you in person," Emojia replied. Emojia had come all the way from the Eastern Sword Pavilion to Lingshan Commandery City just to tell Shao Chen that someone had proposed to separate Shao Chen and Guduwia from the 10 great geniuses. They would be the 4th level of the heavenly Qin continent's geniuses and be given the title of strongest geniuses. Just for this matter, Emojia had come all the way to Lingshan Commandery City. Looking at Emojia's excited face, Shao Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. "This guy is really, please add recommend reward." Chapter 87. Shao Chen smiled helplessly at Emojia. He really didn't know what to say to him. Emojia had actually rushed all the way from the East Sword Pavilion to Lingshan City for such a small matter. Shao Chen didn't know about the outside world's discussions about him and Guduwia. However, even if he knew, Shao Chen would probably just laugh it off. The title of the strongest heaven's pride seemed mighty and domineering, but one also needed to have the corresponding strength to back it up. Without strength, it was just a joke. Just like now. Although he didn't deliberately ask around, he could guess that many people in the central divine realm were probably jealous of him, the number 1 heaven's pride of the 4 regions. After all, in their eyes, the 4 regions were just uncivilized places. Even if Shao Chen claimed to be the king here, so what? Moreover, Xiao Chen had surpassed them and was directly on par with Guduia. This naturally caused the other heavens' prides to be dissatisfied. Moreover, it wasn't just the heavens' prides of the central divine realm. Gu Lei and the other two were probably not convinced of him. If they met again in the future, it was inevitable that there would be a fight. At that time, if he didn't have enough strength, wouldn't he become the laughing stock of the four of them? Therefore, Xiao Chen had never deliberately pursued the title of the strongest heaven's pride. This was because Xiao Chen understood that when one's strength reached a certain level, one would naturally obtain these things. However, if one deliberately pursued these things without strength, in the end, it would just be playing to the gallery. Xiao Chen smiled and patted Emojie's shoulder. Since you're here, stay. Tomorrow we'll go to the Qin residence together. Since Emojie was already here, he might as well let him follow him to the Qin residence. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Emojie agreed without hesitation. After a silent night, early the next morning, Xiao Chen, Emojie, Little Qing, Xiao Qing, and Bai Ryue, 4 people and 1 beast, left Lingshan City on a green eagle and rushed towards the Qin residence. While Xiao Chen and the others were rushing to the Qin clan, Qin Shuru, who was wearing a long green dress, was sitting alone in the garden of the Qin clan in the Luoyun city. Compared to before, Qin Shuru's temperament had undergone an earth-shaking change. It was unknown whether it was due to the activation of the Yin spirit body. If Qin Shuru could only be regarded as an ordinary beauty before, then Qin Shuru's appearance was now enough to be called a beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. Her entire appearance and temperament had changed too much. She was like an iceberg, keeping people thousands of miles away. Her beautiful appearance gave people a feeling that they could only admire her from afar and not touch her. Qin Shuru sat alone in the garden. Ever since he had parted with Xiao Chen, he had returned home. He knew that Mu Qing had formally proposed to his father and that his father had agreed. Regarding this, Qin Shuru had no room to refuse. He knew that his father wanted to use Mu Qing to strengthen the Qin clan and let the Qin clan return to its homeland. The Qin clan was not originally from the Eastern Sun region. Hundreds of years ago, the Qin clan was actually a large clan in the central divine region. However, due to some unforeseen circumstances, the entire clan was almost wiped out. In the end, only a small number of people managed to escape. Later on, the Qin clan moved to the Eastern Sun region and formed the current Qin clan in Cloudfall City. Qin Shuru's father's lifelong wish was to lead the Qin clan back to the central divine region and restore the Qin clan to its former glory. It was precisely because of this obsession in his heart that Qin Shuru's father agreed to Mu Qing's marriage proposal. He wanted to borrow the strength of the Mu clan to bring the Qin clan back to the central divine region. Qin Shuru stared blankly at the dagger in his hand. He had already made up his mind. If his father insisted on marrying Mu Qing, then he would commit suicide on the day of the wedding. He would rather die than marry Mu Qing. He had already made up his mind. His eyes were blank as he spoke indifferently. Junior brother Xiao Chen was the first person Qin Shuru had ever loved in his life. At the same time, he was also the only person. In this lifetime, Qin Shuru would only marry Xiao Chen. He had never thought that Xiao Chen would come, nor did he know that Xiao Chen was now the leader of the 4 prided kings. No one told Qin Shuru about this. Since he had been under house arrest, Qin Shuru clearly had no contact with outsiders. Naturally, he did not know what was happening in the outside world. The day quickly passed. The next morning, as the sun rose, the Qin clan became lively. Today was the day of Qin Shuru and Mu Qing's wedding. Early in the morning, Qin Shuru began to dress up with the help of 4 maids. In the main hall of the Qin clan, Mu Qing, who was dressed in a red robe, was chatting with Qin Shuru's father as they waited for the auspicious time to arrive. Qin Shuru's father looked worriedly at Mu Qing and said, "Nephew, I'm a little worried about Xiao Chen from the East Sword Pavilion. Do you think he will come and cause trouble?" His name was Qin Lai. Hearing Qin Lai's words, Mu Qing smiled and said, "So what if he comes? Does the East Sword Pavilion really dare to start a war with my myriad immortal tower? Moreover, I believe that the upper echelons of the East Sword Pavilion are not fools. They won't go to war over a woman." This time, Mu Qing had obtained the full support of the upper echelons of the myriad immortal tower to marry Qin Shi. Therefore, he was not afraid of Shao Qin coming to cause trouble. In Mu Qing's opinion, the East Sword Pavilion would not become enemies with the myriad immortal tower over a woman like Qin Shi. Hearing Mu Qing's words, Qin Lai nodded slightly. However, the worry in his eyes did not lessen. In his opinion, Mu Qing had thought of everything too well. Mu Qing did not notice the change in Qin Lai's expression. At this moment, he was immersed in the joy of the wedding. Of course, his joy was not because he truly loved Qin Shiru, but because of the Yin spirit body. As long as he could obtain Qin Shiru's virginity, Mu Qing would be able to obtain great benefits. At that time, even if Shao Qin was one of the top 10 prides of Tianqin, so what? Mu Qing would still be able to defeat him with his own hands. He was still thinking about Qin Shiru's virginity. However, if Mu Qing knew that Qin Shiru had already given his virginity to Shao Qin, who knew what kind of expression he would have? "Shao Qin, I will definitely get back at you for the humiliation you gave me in the 100 Spirits graveyard. Moreover, this day will not be long." Mu Qing thought to himself. Even now, he was still fantasizing about finding Shao Qin for revenge. He was still thinking about Qin Shiru's virginity. At the same time, as time passed, many invited guests arrived one after another. On one side was the largest family in the Falling Cloud City, and on the other side was one of the 5 giants of the Eastern Sun region. Under such circumstances, there were naturally many people who came to attend the wedding. First of all the major families of the Falling Cloud City came to visit. At the same time, the giants like the Leshan Prefecture, Fire Cloud Sect, and Blood Demon Hall also sent people to attend. Among them, the true dragons of the Leshan Prefecture and Fire Cloud Sect, Lin Xing and Zhao Weiyun, were also present. It was extremely lively. Moreover, the identities of the people who came were incomparably prominent. Apart from the Eastern Sword Pavilion, the other 4 giants of the Eastern Sun region were all present. However, while they were celebrating, everyone had their own thoughts. Many brothers in the book review section are asking about the update time. Here is a unified reply. I guarantee at least 3 updates a day. These 3 updates will not be lacking. The update time is 12 noon, 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. Brothers, there will definitely be an update when the time comes. In addition, this is a new book. Please bookmark it, recommend it, and reward it. Also, brothers who want to join the book group can add it. Group number 579603753. Chapter 88. Guests were arriving unceasingly. At this moment, Lin Xing and Zhao Weiyun were sitting on a bench in the hall. They were drinking wine while looking at the endless stream of people. It's really lively. Almost all the influential people in the Eastern Sun region are here, Zhao Weiyun said with a chuckle after taking a sip of wine. Hearing Zhao Weiyun's words, Lin Xing smiled and said, "Don't be anxious. The real main character has yet to appear." "Little brother, do you think Shao Qin will really come?" Lin Wanner, who was sitting beside Lin Xing, asked curiously. "My good sister, don't worry. He will definitely come." Lin Xing smiled helplessly as Lin Wanner had asked this question many times along the way. Lin Wanner was very interested in Shao Qin. She had an indescribable feeling whenever she thought of this little brother who had stayed in the deathmatch arena for half a year. Was it curiosity or something else? In short, Lin Wanner really wanted to see Shao Qin. She wanted to see this little brother who was now one of the top 10 prides of Tianqin. Lin Xing and Zhao Weiyun were sure that Shao Qin would definitely come. That was why the 10,000 Immortals House and Fire Cloud Sect hadn't sent any congratulatory gift. Not only them, but the people from the Blood Demon Palace also didn't send any congratulatory gift. Mu Qing naturally knew what they were thinking. They were definitely waiting for Xiao Chen to come. A cold glint flashed in her eyes as she cursed inwardly, a bunch of idiots. Wait until I obtain the Yin spirit body. I will definitely make you regret it. Lin Xing, Zhaoyun, just you wait. Mu Qing was very dissatisfied with the actions of the three giants, but she couldn't do anything now. She could only force a smile. The guests who came to congratulate finally arrived at dusk. The entire main hall and courtyard of the Qin residence were filled with people. Among them, the people sitting in the main hall were the people from the Qin family and the four giants. The auspicious hour had arrived. Qin Shuru, who was wearing a long red dress with a phoenix coronet and a veil covering her face, slowly walked into the hall accompanied by four maids. Everyone shifted their attention to Qin Shuru. Mu Qing strode to Qin Shuru and pretended to be gentle. Shui Ro, Qin Shuru ignored Mu Qing. He walked up to his father and asked coldly, "Father, do you really want me to marry Mu Qing?" Qin Shuru actually asked such a question in front of everyone. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Qin Lai growled angrily, "Shut up! Marriage is decided by your parents. I'm your father. You'll marry whoever I want you to." After berating Qin Shuru in a low voice, Qin Lai immediately gave the order to start the ceremony to prevent any undue delay. Qin Lai was determined to marry Qin Shuru to Mu Qing. After receiving Qin Lai's final answer, Qin Shuru's beautiful face that was hidden in the veil revealed a determined look. Her right hand, which was hidden in her robe, clenched tightly onto the dagger that she had prepared earlier. Mountains without edges, rivers dry up, thunder rumbles in winter, snow falls in summer, and heaven and earth unite. Only then will I be separated from you. Junior brother Xiaoqin, I hope that I can always be by your side in the next life. Qin Shuru murmured softly. As soon as she finished her sentence, the dagger in her hand glinted in a chilling light. Everyone witnessed the sharp dagger piercing towards Qin Shuru's heart. She's committing suicide. The bride is actually committing suicide on her wedding day. Upon witnessing Qin Shuru's actions, everyone's expression changed. Qin Lai bellowed furiously. What are you trying to do, you unfilial daughter? Stop right there. Qin Shuru actually committed suicide at this moment, which was simply a disgrace to him. However, Qin Shuru acted as though she didn't hear her father's bellow. She continued to stab the dagger in her hand towards her heart. Just as the beauty was about to die, everyone saw a black shadow flash past the entrance of the Qin clan. Then, a handsome young man in white appeared behind Qin Shuru and grabbed her wrist. At the same time, he spoke with a faint smile on his face. "My dear senior sister, what am I going to do if you die?" The young man was none other than Xiao Chen. He managed to make it at the last moment. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shuiro's body trembled. The dagger in her hand fell to the ground unconsciously, and tears flowed out of her eyes uncontrollably. He didn't expect Xiao Chen to really come. In the past, Qin Shuru had fantasized more than once that Xiao Chen would descend from the sky like a deity and take him away in front of everyone. However, this was only a fantasy. First of all, Qin Shuru didn't know if Xiao Chen really liked him. Secondly, if Xiao Chen wanted to take him away, it would be tantamount to becoming enemies with the entire Myriad Immortals Tower. Even if Xiao Chen was willing, would the East Sword Pavilion agree? The fantasy of the past had now become reality. In front of everyone, Xiao Chen held Qin Shuru's little hand without any scruples and said in a playful tone, "Senior sister, you're not kind. You secretly drugged me, took my virginity, and left without saying a word. Do you know how sad I am?" However, Qin Shuiro's face flushed red when she heard this. She recalled what happened that night and felt shy in her heart. He lowered his head and didn't know what to say. After hearing her words, the expressions of the people around them became much more interesting. Virginity? What did she mean? Could it be that Xiao Chun and Qin Shuru were already? None of the people present were fools. Based on Xiao Chen's words, they all guessed something. After hearing her words, Mu Qing's face turned ashen. Virginity? How could it be? In that case, Qin Shuru was no longer a virgin? She had already given her virginity to Xiao Chen? Mu Qing was stunned for a moment. When she came back to her senses, she glared at Qin Shuru and shouted angrily, "You bitch, I thought you were so pure and innocent. I didn't expect you to be a promiscuous bitch. I'm going to kill you." Mu Qing had been looking forward to the Yin spirit body for years. Just when she was about to get what she wanted, she was told that Xiao Chen beat her to it. How could Mu Qing not be furious? Xiao Chen's words were like a sudden clap of thunder that exploded in Mu Qing's ears. Mu Qing had already lost his mind. He roared and rushed towards Qin Shuru. However, just as he arrived in front of Qin Shuru, Xiao Chen appeared in front of Mu Qing in a flash. With a smack, 5 bright red fingerprints were left on Mu Qing's face. It seems that the lesson I taught you in the 100 Spirits graveyard wasn't enough. I remember telling you that Qin Shuru is my woman, but you didn't listen. Now I'm giving you one last chance. Either you get lost, or I'll send you away," Xiao Chen said indifferently after giving Mu Qing a slap. Please add recommend reward. Chapter 89. Mu Qing did not take Xiao Chen seriously at all. Facing Xiao Chen, Mu Qing roared with a ferocious expression. "Xiao Chen, I'm going to kill you!" Mu Qing had suffered defeat after defeat in Xiao Chen's hands. Now, even the Yin spirit body that Mu Qing yearned for had been taken by Xiao Chen, so one could imagine the fury in Mu Qing's heart. Spiritual energy surged around Mu Qing's body. Without any hesitation, Mu Qing launched a punch. Seeing this, Xiao Chen carried Qin Shuru by the waist and flashed to Lin Xing and Zhao Yun's side. "Can the two of you help me take care of my senior sister?" "Don't worry. If your senior sister loses a single strand of hair, you can come and find me," Lin Xing replied with a smile after handing Qin Shuru over to Lin Xing and Zhao Yun. After settling Qin Shuru, Xiao Chen turned to look at Mu Qing. At this moment, Mu Qing attacked. He unsheathed his scarlet-edged sword and slashed out. Wherever the sword passed, a deep crack was split open on the ground. Seeing this, Mu Qing pushed out both his palms in an attempt to block Xiao Chen's sword. However, with just a single contact, Mu Qing was pushed back dozens of meters and landed in the main courtyard. At the same time, blood dripped from his palms. A single slash injured Mu Qing, as expected of a top-tier Earth-level sword. Its power was simply much stronger than the Qingyun sword. Holding the scarlet-edged sword, Xiao Chen slowly walked out of the main hall and arrived at the main courtyard. He looked at Mu Qing and said indifferently, "Do you want to scram yourself, or do you want me to send you off?" Xiao Chen. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Mu Qing shouted coldly and attacked again. He was so angry that he didn't care if he was Xiao Chen's opponent anymore. Seeing that the two of them were about to fight, the surrounding people retreated and gave them space. However, in Xiao Chen's eyes, Mu Qing's attacks were simply laughable. Back then, he was able to defeat Mu Qing with a single sword strike. Now, there was no need to even talk about it. Moreover, he had the Scarlet Edge Sword, a top-tier Earth-class sword. With a slash of his sword, he executed the Golden Kill swordplay. It was as though he had returned to the 100 Spirits graveyard. The sky was filled with flickering sword shadows. When the sword shadows disappeared, Mu Qing was once again heavily injured. Xiao Chen defeated the enemy with a single slash. She knelt on the ground, covered in blood, and looked down at the heavily injured Murin. "Don't challenge my patience again. Don't think that I don't dare to kill you." Scram. After saying that, Xiao Chen turned around and prepared to leave. However, at this moment, the myriad Immortal Tower's house master, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. "Xiao Chen, aren't you looking down on my myriad Immortal Tower by causing a ruckus at my disciple's wedding?" As the house master of the myriad immortal tower and Mu Qing's master, he hadn't interfered before. Now that he spoke, Xiao Chen looked at him and said, "Why? Does your myriad immortal tower want to get involved in this mess? Mu Qing is my disciple. Today is his wedding, yet you humiliated him like this. Do you think my myriad immortal tower will sit by and do nothing?" said the house master. As his voice faded, a total of 12 figures appeared in the sky. These 12 people were the top fighting force of the myriad immortal tower. They were equivalent to the core elders of the Eastern Sword Pavilion and Song Xian's trio. Their cultivation had surpassed the heaven realm. Including the house master, there were a total of 13 experts of the myriad immortal tower whose cultivation had surpassed the heaven realm gathered here. It was obvious that the myriad immortal tower had long prepared for this. They had already made preparations for Xiao Chen's appearance. Therefore, the experts of the myriad immortal tower had been hiding in the dark to control the situation and allow the wedding to proceed smoothly. The house master didn't directly attack. He slowly got up and took a step forward. His figure instantly appeared in front of Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen naturally felt great pressure in the face of a Dao confirmation expert who was at the same level as Song Xian. However, he didn't change his expression in the slightest. Their eyes met and the house master finally spoke. "I'll also give you a chance. Leave or don't blame me for being impolite. I already expected this. If it weren't for the myriad immortal tower support, how would this trash dare to ignore my warning? Let me guess, perhaps you think that the Eastern Sword Pavilion won't completely offend the myriad immortal tower for a woman?" Xiao Chen slowly said without the slightest hint of nervousness. Mu Qing had something to rely on. This was something Xiao Chen had already guessed. If not, how would he dare to ignore his warning? Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, the house master fell silent. Xiao Chen was right. Seeing this, Xiao Chen paused for a moment before continuing. "But since I dared to come, I naturally wouldn't be unprepared. Since your myriad immortal tower has experts, so does my Eastern Sword Pavilion." As Xiao Chen's voice faded, the 10 core elders of the Eastern Sword Pavilion, as well as Song Xian, Song Long and Song Yun, appeared one after another. In the sky above the Qin residence, the top experts of the two hegemons faced each other. The 10 core elders of the Eastern Sword Pavilion were naturally facing the core elders of the myriad immortal tower. Their numbers were the same. As the two sides looked at each other, one of the core elders of the Eastern Sword Pavilion smiled and said, I didn't expect that the myriad immortal tower would send so many people to our Eastern Sword Pavilion's true dragon wedding today. Why are you all here to congratulate us?" A frivolous tease sounded. Upon hearing this, the core elders of the myriad immortal tower naturally shouted. "Fatty Jean, what did you say?" The core elders of both sides knew each other. After all, although the Eastern Sun region had a large population, there were only a few people whose cultivation had surpassed the heaven-human stage. Therefore, everyone naturally knew each other. "Enough nonsense. If you want to fight, then fight. If you don't, then leave. Don't interfere with the wedding of our Eastern Sword Pavilion's disciple," another core elder of the Eastern Sword Pavilion said. The core elders of both sides faced each other, and so did the hegemons. Landing beside Xiao Chen, Song Xian calmly looked at the house master of the myriad immortal tower and said, "How about it? Do you choose to fight or to retreat?" He didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Upon hearing Song Xian's words, the house master of the myriad immortal tower coldly asked, "Song Xian, does your Eastern Sword Pavilion really want to start a war with my myriad immortal tower over a woman?" He previously thought that the Eastern Sword Pavilion wouldn't make such a big fuss over a woman, but now it seemed that he was wrong. Song Xian and the other two core elders had all moved out. This was enough to show the Eastern Sword Pavilion's attitude. Of course, the Eastern Sword Pavilion naturally didn't do this for Qin Shuru, but for Xiao Chen. Because Xiao Chen was going to marry Qin Shuru, all the experts of the Eastern Sword Pavilion had come to support Xiao Chen. A total of 26 experts whose cultivation had surpassed the heaven-human stage were gathered in one place. Both sides faced each other, and the pressure unconsciously emitted from their bodies made the faces of many guests turn pale. They hadn't even made a move, but they already felt that they couldn't bear the extreme pressure. Normally, it was rare to see Dao-seeking realm experts, but now there were a total of 20 of them here. There were even 6 Dao-confirming realm experts. Without a doubt, the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal House had turned out in full force. With such a lineup, once the battle started, it would really be out of control. Either you die or I die. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 90. There were a total of 26 experts whose cultivation had surpassed the heaven stage. The entire Qin clan was shrouded in a tense atmosphere, and everyone present found it difficult to even breathe. The Myriad Immortal Tower Master coldly shouted at Song Xian. Song Xian, is your East Sword Pavilion really going to start a war over a woman? No need to talk nonsense. Either you retreat or we fight. Song Xian indifferently replied to the Myriad Immortal Tower Master's shout. His attitude was extremely tough. He had always thought that the East Sword Pavilion would not start a war over a woman, but now it seemed that the situation was completely the opposite. However, with so many people present, where would the Myriad Immortal Tower's face be if they took the initiative to retreat? Wouldn't they become the laughingstock of the Eastern Sun region in the future? As a hegemon force, they valued their face more than anything else. Therefore, it was impossible for the Myriad Immortal Tower Master to retreat in the face of such a situation. Thus, they could only fight. A fierce glint flashed in the Myriad Immortal Tower Master's eyes as he said in a deep voice, "You think I'm afraid of you? If you want to fight, then come." As a hegemon force, the Myriad Immortal Tower naturally would not lower its head to the East Sword Pavilion. Song Xian coldly smiled. Since that's the case, everyone, choose your opponents. Today, this old man will destroy the Myriad Immortal Tower here. Destroy the Myriad Immortal Tower here? Everyone present was stunned by Song Xian's words. How arrogant was this? The 5 hegemon forces of the Eastern Sun region had stood for hundreds of years and had always been on par with each other. Now, Song Xian actually wanted to destroy the Myriad Immortal Tower in front of everyone? Everyone was extremely shocked. However, the people of the East Sword Pavilion did not change their expressions in the slightest. The 10 core elders chose their opponents one after another. The core elder of the East Sword Pavilion, who was called Fatty Jean, directly stopped in front of a core elder of the Myriad Immortal Tower and said with a faint smile, "Old witch, shouldn't we settle the previous score? Fatty Jean, you're courting death." Upon hearing Fatty Jean's words, the core elder of the Myriad Immortal Tower bellowed furiously. Soon after, the 2 of them charged into the sky. Shortly after, the terrifying shock waves from their battles spread from the sky. "Elder Master Bai, come." That's exactly what I was thinking. Soon, the core elders of the 2 forces engaged in a fierce battle. Everyone had some grudges between them, and this was the best time to settle them. The 10 core elders took action. Then, Song Yun and Song Long each chose a vice-sect master of the Myriad Immortal Tower. Their cultivation bases had also reached the Dao confirmation realm. Looking at his opponent, a beautiful woman in a purple dress, Song Yun said flatly. "Come on." Hearing Song Yun's words, the beautiful woman said with a complicated expression, "Song Yun, is your East Sword Pavilion really going to fight to the death for a woman?" In the eyes of the 10,000 Immortals Tower, the East Sword Pavilion was simply crazy. They didn't hesitate to start an all-out war for a woman. Hearing the beautiful woman's words, Song Yun smiled and said, "You're wrong. We're not doing this for a woman, but for the hidden dragon of my East Sword Pavilion. Xiao Chen's thoughts are the sword of my East Sword Pavilion." As soon as he finished speaking, Song Yun attacked. Seeing this, the beautiful woman naturally wouldn't allow herself to be captured without a fight. The two immediately engaged in a fierce battle. After Tsang Yun, Tsang Long and Tsang Xian also engaged in a fierce battle. Tsang Xian against the House Master of the Myriad Immortal Tower. 20 Dao Querying Realm experts and 6 Dao Validation Realm experts were engaged in a fierce battle. The constant pressure coming from the sky made everyone feel suffocated. Although both sides had deliberately placed the battle above the clouds, the terrifying pressure was still hard for everyone to accept. Many people looked at the sky in a daze and couldn't help but whisper softly. Has the battle really started? Until now, they still couldn't believe that the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal Tower had actually started a war. One must know that although the 5 giants of the Eastern Sun region occasionally had conflicts, each side was relatively restrained. There had never been a chaotic battle between the top forces of both sides. One must know that the battle between the Dao-seeking experts and the Dao confirmation experts was completely out of control. Once it broke out, it would be difficult to end it. They were really fighting fiercely. Not only them, even Zhao Wuyun and Lin Xing, the 2 great hidden dragons, were shocked at this moment. Have they really started fighting? Zhao Wuyun whispered softly. The Myriad Immortal Tower probably never thought that the East Sword Pavilion would be so crazy, said Lin Xing. The 2 giants had really started an all-out war. Regarding this, Lin Xing, Zhao Wuyun, and an elder of the Blood Demon Palace immediately sent the news back to the sect. Knowing that the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal Tower had really started an all-out war, the sect masters of the Leshan Prefecture, Fire Cloud Sect, and Blood Demon Palace were all stunned. This matter was probably going to get out of hand. The 3 giants chose to bide their time and let the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal Tower fight to the death. As for the final outcome, it didn't have much to do with them. Moreover, no matter what the outcome was, it would be beneficial to them. Because no matter who won in the end, it would definitely be a situation where both sides suffered heavy losses. At that time, the 3 giants could come out to clean up the mess and even swallow the territories of the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal Tower. Everyone had their own ulterior motives, but Xiao Chun was extremely calm, as if he wasn't worried that the East Sword Pavilion would fall into a situation where both sides suffered heavy losses. There were some things that the world didn't know. The current East Sword Pavilion was no longer the East Sword Pavilion of the past. Mu Qing's expression was calm and indifferent. At the same time, seeing that the East Sword Pavilion and the Myriad Immortal Tower had really started a war, he stood up shakily and shouted at Xiao Chen with a face full of shock and anger. "Lunatic, you lunatic! For a woman, you actually persuaded the East Sword Pavilion to start a war with my Myriad Immortal Tower. Do you know the consequences of doing so?" The 2 sides had already started a fierce battle. At this time, no one could stop this war. After all, the people fighting were all top experts of the Eastern Sun region. How could they stop before the outcome was decided? Mu Qing had completely miscalculated. It should be said that he didn't expect Xiao Chun and the East Sword Pavilion to be so crazy. For a woman, they would actually go to this extent. In the face of Mu Qing's angry shout, Xiao Chun smiled and turned to look at him. "Do you think that my East Sword Pavilion will perish together with your Myriad Immortal Tower? Mu Qing, you think too much. Such an ending will never happen." He had absolute confidence in Tsang Xian and the others because no one knew how generous the rewards from the Central Divine Domain were this time. It was so generous that even Tsang Xian and the others were shocked. In particular, the rewards given by the 9 Cloud Palace, the ruler of the 9 Clouds, were specifically selected according to the cultivation level of Tsang Xian and the others. Many of them were rare heavenly treasures in the Eastern Sun region. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 91. No one knew how generous the rewards the East Sword Pavilion had received from 9 Firmaments Palace. In addition, No one knew that Xiao Chen's performance in the Hundred Spirits graveyard had revealed a secret that the East Sword Pavilion had kept hidden for many years. At the same time, it had fulfilled the dream of Tsang Xian and the other two. The world didn't know this, but the Myriad Immortal Tower no longer had the qualifications to fight the East Sword Pavilion. This could be seen from the battle in the sky. After an intense battle, the 10 core elders of the Myriad Immortal Tower had ugly expressions. At the same time, the Myriad Immortal Tower Master and the other 2 Dao validation experts were the same. After exchanging over 100 moves with Tsang Xian, the Myriad Immortal Tower Master's eyes were filled with disbelief. All of you have broken through to the half-step Dao Gate realm? After an intense battle, the Myriad Immortal Tower Master couldn't believe that everyone from the East Sword Pavilion had broken through. The 10 core elders had broken through from the Dao-seeking realm to the half-step Dao validation realm, while Tsang Xian, Tsang Yun, and Tsang Long had broken through from the Dao validation realm to the half-step Dao Gate realm. Although it was only a small half-step, at the Dao-seeking realm and the Dao validation realm, the difference of a half-step was like the difference between heaven and earth. Just like now, after everyone from the East Sword Pavilion had broken through, the Myriad Immortal Tower was no match for them. It was only a matter of time before they were defeated. In the face of the Myriad Immortal Tower Master's shock, Tsang Xian smiled indifferently. Why, are you very surprised? The Myriad Immortal Tower Master fell silent after hearing Tsang Xian's words. He finally understood where the East Sword Pavilion's confidence came from. He didn't expect the experts from the East Sword Pavilion to break through in such a short period of time. As such, the Myriad Immortal Tower was indeed no match for them. The path of martial arts started from the Body Refinement Realm, followed by the Channel Opening Realm, followed by the Yellow Realm, Mysterious Aeon Realm, Earth Mirror Realm, and Heaven Realm. After the Heaven Realm, cultivators had already transcended the mortal world and began to seek the vast path of martial art. It was called the Dao-seeking realm. From the Dao-seeking realm, it was followed by the Dao validation realm, Dao Gate realm, and Dao transformation realm. Previously, the core elders of the 5 great leaders of the Eastern Sun region had been at the Dao querying realm, while the other great leaders had been at the Dao affirmation realm. But now, the core elders of the East Sword Pavilion and the Tsang Xian trio had all made breakthroughs. The cultivation of the 10 core elders had reached the half-step Dao validation stage, while the Tsang Xian trio had reached the half-step Dao Gate stage. As a result, the overall strength of the East Sword Pavilion had naturally increased greatly, leaving the other 4 giants behind. He couldn't understand how the East Sword Pavilion had improved so much in such a short period of time. However, Tsang Xian clearly didn't give the Myriad Immortal Tower's master too much time to think. His attacks didn't slow down, and after several hundred moves, Tsang Xian successfully struck the Myriad Immortal Tower's master's chest, injuring him. They had already gained an overwhelming advantage. Moreover, it was not just Tsang Xian. The East Sword Pavilion was also suppressing the Myriad Immortal Tower on the other battlefield. No one knew what the battle situation was like in the sky. Just as everyone was making wild guesses, a black shadow descended from the sky and landed heavily in front of everyone. Someone had been shot down from the sky. Did this mean that the victor had already been decided? Everyone looked at the figure that had fallen from the sky. When the dust dissipated, everyone saw that it was a core elder of the Myriad Immortal Tower. The Myriad Immortal Tower's first defeat shocked everyone for a moment. However, this was just the beginning. In a short period of 100 breaths, 9 more figures descended from the sky in succession. They were all core elders of the Myriad Immortal Tower. As a result, the core elders of the Myriad Immortal Tower were all wiped out, leaving only the Myriad Immortal Tower's master and the other 2 Dao validation experts. No one had expected such a situation. However, in just a few dozen breaths, the Myriad Immortal Tower's master and the other 2 also descended from the sky, followed by the experts of the East Sword Pavilion. The final result of the battle between the two giants was that the myriad immortal tower was completely crushed. The 10 core elders of the Dao querying realm and the 3 Dao validation experts were all defeated. On the other hand, although some of the East Sword Pavilion's experts were injured, they were all fine. There was no doubt that the East Sword Pavilion had won this battle. No one knew what had happened in the battle in the sky, but the outcome was obvious. The East Sword Pavilion had easily crushed the Myriad Immortal Tower. Looking at the Myriad Immortal Tower's master, who was on his last breath, Song Xian, who was hovering in the air, shouted coldly, "I'll give you 3 breaths of time. Scram or die here." At this moment, no one felt that Song Xian's words were arrogant because he had proven himself with his strength. However, at the same time, in the face of such an outcome, everyone was puzzled. When did the East Sword Pavilion become so strong? Logically speaking, as the 5 giants of the Eastern Sun region, the difference in strength between the two sides shouldn't be that big. If there was such a big difference in strength, the East Sword Pavilion would have dominated the Eastern Sun region long ago. Why would they wait until now? Although they were puzzled, the outcome was already decided. In the face of Song Xian's shout, the Myriad Immortal Tower's master didn't refute because the current situation was that as long as Song Xian wanted to, the Myriad Immortal Tower would be removed from the Eastern Sun region. He no longer had the intention to fight. Seeing this, Song Xian glanced at Mu Qing, who had an ugly expression on his face, and said indifferently, "And you can scram too." The instigator was Mu Qing, so Song Xian naturally wouldn't forget him. Upon hearing this, Mu Qing's face gradually turned sinister. The development of the situation had completely exceeded his expectations. He originally thought that the East Sword Pavilion wouldn't start an all-out war for Qin Shuru, but the reality had undoubtedly given him a slap in the face. Not only did the East Sword Pavilion start an all-out war, but they also won a complete victory and completely crushed the Myriad Immortal Tower. Mu Qing clenched his fists and his face turned sinister. After a long while, as if he had made a decision, a look of determination flashed in his eyes. Then, the storage ring in his hand flashed and a golden talisman paper appeared in his hand. Seeing this talisman, Song Long in the sky exclaimed in surprise. "A teleportation talisman, this is..." At a glance, he recognized that Mu Qing had taken out a teleportation talisman. In front of everyone, Mu Qing shouted like a madman, "You forced me to do this. Xiao Qin and everyone from the East Sword Pavilion, you must die. I want you all to die in front of me." As he spoke, Mu Qing activated the teleportation talisman in his hand. Soon, a door of light formed in front of him. Talismans were things that only talisman masters could inscribe. Just like weapon refiners and alchemists, talisman masters had a very noble status in the heavenly Chun continent. As the name implied, the teleportation talisman was a talisman that could build a spatial channel. Under normal circumstances, every teleportation talisman would be connected to a teleportation array. As long as the teleportation talisman was activated, the connected teleportation array could be opened for 2 parties to use. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 92. Xiao Chun didn't know where the teleportation formation that Mu Qing's teleportation talisman was connected to was. However, knowing Mu Qing's identity, a cold glint flashed through his eyes. He had already guessed where Mu Qing's teleportation talisman led to. As someone who had been abandoned by the Mu clan and possessed a precious treasure like the spatial talisman, there was no doubt that the spatial talisman was connected to the Mu clan. In other words, Mu Qing was asking the Mu clan for help. As the illegitimate son of the current head of the Mu clan and a lowly servant, Mu Qing was an abandoned son of the Mu clan. If he asked for help from the Mu clan, would the Mu clan help him? Even if they did, who would the Mu clan send and what level of cultivation would they have? Xiao Qin guessed that Mu Qing was asking for help from the Mu clan. At the same time, after Mu Qing activated his teleportation talisman, in the Mu clan's residence in the Mu clan's Mu clan, the teleportation formation hidden in the lake suddenly emitted a white light. This was the sign that the teleportation formation had been activated. As one of the 7 overlords of the heavenly Qin continent, the entire Mu clan's territory was extremely large. The Mu clan's residence was built in the heart of the Mu clan's residence, occupying a total of 108 peak. Although it was called a clan, its scale was no less than that of a sect. From this, one could see how powerful the Mu clan was. As the current head of the Mu clan, Mu Yiyang was wearing a simple cyan robe. His face was handsome and his body unconsciously emitted a dignified aura. Sitting in a bamboo pavilion in the courtyard, Mu Yiyang looked at the teleportation formation and muttered to himself expressionlessly. Mu Qing, huh? Mu Yiyang looked at the teleportation formation with a complicated expression and muttered to himself. Mu Qing was an abandoned son of the Mu clan. Even his name wasn't listed in the Mu clan's genealogy. It could be said that in the Mu clan, there was no such person as Mu Qing. But no matter what, Mu Qing was still his son and the teleportation talisman was given to him by Mu Yiyang. It could be considered as a life-saving treasure. He had promised Mu Qing that as long as he activated the teleportation talisman, he would immediately rush over. This was the only concern he had for Mu Qing as a father. And now, Mu Qing had really activated the teleportation talisman. After a moment of silence, Mu Yiyang stood up and slowly walked out of the pavilion. He stood on the teleportation formation. Without telling anyone, under the white light, Mu Yiyang's figure slowly disappeared. He didn't break his promise to Mu Qing. He went alone to the Dongyang region. Mu Yiyang had already teleported to the Dongyang region. At the same time, in the main courtyard of the Qin clan, Mu Yiyang, who was wearing a cyan robe, slowly walked out of the light door. After he appeared, the light door slowly disappeared. Indifferently sizing up the surrounding people, Mu Yiyang frowned slightly, then looked at Mu Qing and asked, "What's the matter?" 2 simple words, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a father's love for his son. Facing Mu Yiyang's indifference, Mu Qing gritted his teeth and replied, "I want you to kill everyone in the East Sword Pavilion." Towards Mu Yiyang, Mu Qing's heart was filled with endless resentment. He had been resentful since the day he was born. Why was he expelled from the Mu clan and even exiled to the Dongyang region? Could it be that the Mu clan couldn't accept him? Just because he was the son of Mu Yiyang and a lowly servant, he was given the title of a lowly person? His eyes were filled with hatred, but Mu Yiyang didn't mind. "I said that in this life, I will only help you with one thing. Are you sure?" He was summoned to destroy the Dongjian pavilion. Facing Mu Yiyang's question, Mu Qing gritted his teeth and nodded. "I'm sure." He knew that Mu Yiyang would only help him once. After this, Mu Yiyang wouldn't care about his life anymore. Mu Qing should have treasured this opportunity, but the hatred in his heart made him only have one thought, and that was to destroy the Dongjian pavilion and kill Shao Chun. The hatred in his eyes was mixed with the desire to kill. The hatred came from the resentment towards Mu Yiyang, and the desire to kill came from the anger towards Shao Chun. Mu Yiyang's face was a little ferocious. After getting Mu Qing's confirmation, he nodded slightly and took a step forward. In this step, Mu Yiyang, who was like an ordinary person, suddenly burst out with the power of breaking the sky. It was as if they were 2 completely different people. The contrast was too great. Facing this pressure, many of the people present fainted. Those who were only at the Yellow Realm couldn't even resist the pressure and fainted. Even those who were at the mysterious Ian realm were struggling to hold on. Strong, too strong. If Song Xian and the others were like majestic mountains, then Mu Yiyang was like an unreachable star in the 9th heaven. There was no comparison between the two. Beyond the Dao Gate realm, Song Long, who had already touched the threshold of the Dao Gate realm, felt Mu Yang's pressure and said to himself. It was obvious that Mu Yang's cultivation had already surpassed the Tao Gate realm. Mu Yang said softly. Point someone, you point one and I'll kill one. These words were so domineering. He didn't put anyone in his eyes and directly asked Mu Qing to point someone. Mu Qing pointed one and Mu Yang would kill one. Hearing Mu Yang's words, Mu Qing couldn't help but tremble. Was this the tyranny of the Mu family? He couldn't help but fantasize. If he could be recognized by the Mu family, what would he be like now? Of course, this was only Mu Qing's fantasy. He would never be recognized by the Mu family in this lifetime. Mu Qing's eyes were filled with killing intent. He first looked at Song Xian and the other Dongjian pavilion experts in the sky and said coldly. The 13 of them, his first target was Song Xian and the others. As for Xiao Chen, Mu Qing wouldn't let him die so easily. He would let Mu Yang destroy his cultivation and then slowly torture him. From the beginning, he asked Mu Yang to kill Song Xian and the others. Hearing Mu Qing's words, Mu Yang looked at Song Xian and the others. He didn't change his expression even though they were half-step Tao Gate realm experts. It was as if Song Xian and the others were ants in his eyes. His face was expressionless. He slowly pointed his finger and a green light flashed. Facing Mu Yang's finger, Song Xian and the others couldn't even muster up the slightest bit of resistance. What kind of terrifying power was this? It made people unable to even fight back. Song Xian and the others were about to be killed by Mu Yang's finger. But just as the green light was about to hit Song Xian and the others, a purple light appeared and easily blocked Mu Yang's attack. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 93. In the nick of time, a purple light appeared and successfully blocked Mu Yang's attack. Seeing this, Mu Yang frowned. As for the others, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. While Mu Yang was frowning slightly, an illusory figure appeared above Song Xian and the others. The figure was dressed in a robe made of thunder clouds, and the appearance of this figure made everyone lose their composure. Everybody was astonished. It was the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds was using his godly awareness. What was going on? The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had shown up because of a wedding? Everybody looked at the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. After a short time, Lin Xing and Zhao Wuyun came back to their senses and knelt down in front of the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. Greetings, ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. Greetings, ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, said Lin Xing and Zhao Wuyun. The others came back to their senses and knelt down as well. They didn't dare look at the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds ignored them. He looked at Mu Yang indifferently. You can't kill them. Go back. He was the leader of the Mu clan. He had a high social status in the Tianchen continent, but in front of the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, he didn't mean anything. Even though he didn't kneel down, he didn't dare show any disrespect to the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. Said the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds indifferently. Let's go. Go back to where you came from. When Mu Yang heard this, he didn't do anything. The Eastern Sword Pavilion was just a small sect in the Dongyang region. Even though it was one of the 5 biggest sects in the Dongyang region, it was nothing in Mu Yang's eyes. He could have easily destroyed the Eastern Sword Pavilion, but the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had shown up. Mu Yang wasn't happy. He couldn't disobey the ruler of the Mu clan, but the leader of the Mu clan had a very high social status. If he left like that, people would laugh at him. Besides, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds couldn't possibly refuse to give him face because of Dongjian Pavilion. After all, the ancestor of the Mu clan was also one of the 7 rulers. Thinking about that, Mu Yang braced himself and said to the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. Ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, Dongjian Pavilion," said the ruler respectfully. But before Mu Yi-yang could finish, the ruler grunted coldly and interrupted him. He raised his finger, and the 9 clouds godly lightning descended from the sky. The crowd heard lightning crackle, and when the lightning dispersed, Mu Yi-yang was severely injured. "I've already told you to go back to where you came from. Have you turned a deaf ear to my words?" The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had severely injured Mu Yi-yang in one attack. At the same time, Mu Yi-yang hadn't thought that the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds would do something like that. He had just wanted to destroy Dongjian Pavilion, and the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had severely injured him. Mu Yi-yang coughed up blood and slowly stood up. At the same time, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds said, "If you don't piss off in 3 breaths, I'll destroy you." What was wrong with the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds? Why was he so aggressive? Mu Yi-yang pulled a long face, but he wasn't stupid enough to disrespect the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds. As Mu Yi-yang was about to leave, another clone appeared in the sky. When Mu Yi-yang saw that clone, he was overjoyed and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, ancestor," another ruler had arrived. It was the ancestor of the Mu clan, ruler Mu Tian. When 2 rulers appeared, the crowd was going crazy. What was going on? Ruler Mu Tian looked at the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds and said calmly, "Continent of the 9 clouds, you don't respect the Mu clan at all. For the sake of Dongjian Pavilion, you dared injure the leader of the Mu clan. Shouldn't you give me an explanation?" The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had severely injured Mu Yi-yang. That was a humiliation to the Mu clan. As the leader of the Mu clan, Mu Yi-yang represented the Mu clan, and the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had humiliated him. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds heard ruler Mu Tian, he said indifferently, "Explain? Do I need to give you an explanation? I already gave him a chance, but he didn't want it. Therefore, I had no choice but to teach him a lesson." "He good, very good. Yi-yang, I'm here. You don't need to worry about anything. Destroy the East Sword Pavilion. Let's see how the continent of the 9 clouds will stop you," said the ruler of the Heaven of Wood, smiling angrily. Mu Yi-yang had wanted to destroy the Eastern Sword Pavilion, and the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had stopped him. Therefore, the ruler of the Sky of Wood wanted to destroy the Eastern Sword Pavilion in front of the continent of the 9 clouds. Even though the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had injured him, Mu Yi-yang was still strong enough to destroy Dongjian Pavilion. He replied respectfully when he heard the ancestor of the 9 clouds. With the ancestor there, Mu Yi-yang calmed down. He didn't fear the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds anymore. After all, it was impossible for the 2 rulers to kill each other. Mu Yi-yang was about to attack, but the ruler of the Sky of the Wood moved in front of the ruler of the 9 heavens to prevent him from getting involved. As Mu Yi-yang was about to attack, the ruler of the continent of the 9 heavens spoke up. "Today, if you dare lay a finger on anyone from the East Sword Pavilion, my 9 firmaments palace will declare war on the Mu family." He didn't sound threatening at all, but Mu Yi-yang was stupefied. Because of East Sword Pavilion, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had declared war against the Mu clan? Mu Yi-yang wasn't the only one who was astonished. Ruler Mu Tian was also astonished. Why would a ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds do that for Dongjian Pavilion? "Jiu Shao, you want to start a war with my Mu clan for a mere Eastern Sword Pavilion?" Once a war between sovereigns broke out, it wouldn't be like the 5 great leaders of the Eastern Sun region. The flames of war would definitely affect the entire Heavenly Chun continent. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds heard ruler Mu Tian, the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds said indifferently, "Tiny Eastern Sword Pavilion? He. Mu Tian, your Mu family wants to destroy my 9 firmaments palace's Sword Peak. Do you think I can just stand by and watch?" "Sword Peak? What did you say?" The East Sword Pavilion is the sword peak of your 9 firmaments palaces. 9 firmaments palaces sword peak? Asked Heavenly Ruler Wood. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 94. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments said that East Sword Pavilion was the sword peak of 9 firmaments palace, the ruler of Wood looked puzzled. As one of the 7 overlords of the heavenly Chin continent, everyone knew that 9 firmaments palace had 9 peaks. The 9 peaks represented the continent of the 9 firmaments. 9 firmaments palace was different from ordinary sections. It was more like an alliance. The ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments was the palace leader, but he didn't care about the affairs of 9 firmaments palace. Most of the time, the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments palace was more like a symbol of 9 firmaments palace, or a protector. He didn't care about the development of 9 firmaments palace. Therefore, the 9 peaks of 9 firmaments palace did their own things. Although they were part of the same sect, the 9 peaks were separated. This included the distribution of cultivation resources, the issuance of missions, and the businesses under their banner. Each peak master was like the sect master of a sect, monopolizing the power. For over 100 years, the 9 peaks of East Sword Pavilion had only 8 peaks. The 9th peak, Sword Peak, had never had one. When the ruler of Wood heard that East Sword Pavilion was the sword peak of 9 firmaments palace, he was stunned, but he quickly thought of something. Could it be that East Sword Pavilion was founded by Crazy Jian? He suddenly remembered something about 9 firmaments palace. It was around 300 years ago. Back then, the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments palace hadn't become one of the 7 rulers, but he had already founded 9 firmaments palace. Back when 9 firmaments palace was founded, the ruler of the 9 firmaments chose the divine mountain of the 9 firmaments. As the name implied, the divine mountain of the 9 firmaments consisted of 9 towering mountains. Each of the mountains was extremely large, comparable to a mountain range in the eastern Yang region. 9 firmaments palace chose 9 firmaments mountain as their headquarters. Relying on the 9 peaks of 9 firmaments mountain, 9 firmaments palace established 9 peaks. They were Blood Blade Peak, 100 Battles Peak, Mighty God Peak, Nether Spear Peak, Limitless Peak, Holy Maiden Peak, 100 Shadows Peak, Prison Flame Peak and Heavenly Sword Peak. The 9 peaks were the foundation of 9 firmaments palace. The leader of Celestial Sword Peak was the founder of East Sword Pavilion, Crazy Jian, Song Feng. However, not long after 9 firmaments palace was established, Jian Sanzi suddenly announced his withdrawal from 9 firmaments palace. Additionally, he led the cultivators from Heavenly Sword Peak and disappeared. No one knew why Song Feng left 9 firmaments palace. However, since then, 9 firmaments palace's Heavenly Sword Peak had remained empty. 300 years had passed, but only 8 of 9 firmaments palace's 9 peaks remained. Even after the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments palace became a ruler, he still showed no intention of filling up the empty Heavenly Sword Peak. And now, the ruler of the 9 firmaments had personally admitted that the East Sword Pavilion was 9 firmaments palace's Heavenly Sword Peak. That was why ruler Wood had recalled this matter. The heavenly ruler of Wood's guess was correct. The predecessor of the East Sword Pavilion was indeed 9 firmaments palace's Heavenly Sword Peak. The master of the Tsang Xian trio was none other than Song Feng, known as the Lunatic Sword. The reason why Song Feng chose to leave 9 firmaments palace was because of the Peak Lord of Prison Flame Peak. Back then, the Peak Lord of Prison Flame Peak had fallen in love with the Peak Lord of Holy Maiden Peak. However, the Peak Lord of Holy Maiden Peak was in love with Song Feng. After finding out about this, the Peak Lord of Prison Flame Peak had attempted to poison Song Feng. Although Song Feng had managed to escape death in the end, his cultivation base had been crippled due to the number 1 poison in the world, the Nether Domain Heavenly Poison Powder. Without his cultivation base, Song Feng knew that the Peak Lord of Prison Flame Peak would not let him off so easily. Additionally, the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments was in closed-door cultivation, attempting to break through to the ruler stage. Thus, Song Feng had no choice but to secretly flee to the Eastern Sun region. He changed his name and established the East Sword Pavilion there. After over 300 years, no one knew that the East Sword Pavilion's predecessor was 9 Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak. Due to the nether domain Heavenly Poison Powder, Song Feng died young. However, before his death, Song Feng's only wish was for someone to lead the East Sword Pavilion back to 9 Firmaments Palace and restore Heavenly Sword Peak's prestige. Xiao Chun had just learned about the East Sword Pavilion's secret. Because of that, Song Xian and the other two had always tried to find a way to return to 9 Firmaments Palace. Unfortunately, they had never succeeded. But this time, because of Xiao Chen's performance in the 100 Spirits Graveyard, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments finally paid attention to the East Sword Pavilion. When the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments Palace learned that the East Sword Pavilion had been founded by Song Feng, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments Palace immediately gave the order for the East Sword Pavilion to inherit the 9th peak of 9 Firmaments Palace, Heavenly Sword Peak. But when the ruler of the continent of the 9 Clouds learned the truth, the leader of the prison Flame Peak had escaped. Even the ruler of the continent of the 9 Clouds couldn't find him. Even the ruler of the continent of the 9 Clouds couldn't find him. Because of Xiao Qin, the East Sword Pavilion had finally been able to return to 9 Firmaments Palace and regain control of Heavenly Sword Peak. He knew that if the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments was right, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments would definitely fight to the death with the Mu clan. In the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments, he had already let Song Feng down. Song Feng had died because of his brother. Therefore, if the Mu clan wanted to attack the East Sword Pavilion, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments would definitely fight to the death. He hadn't thought that the East Sword Pavilion would have such a secret. After a short time, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments Palace grabbed Mu Yang and the two of them disappeared. The ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments Palace decided to give way. After the two of them left, Mu Qing was in despair. He hadn't thought that things would turn out this way. But before he could come back to his senses, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments said, "People of the 10,000 Immortals Tower, piss off within 3 breaths." When the members of the 10,000 Immortals Tower heard that, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty. They left without hesitation. Mu Qing followed them, of course. After the members of the 10,000 Immortals Tower left, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments Palace looked at Xiao Qin and smiled thinly. "Little boy, I'll wait for you in 9 Firmaments Palace." When Xiao Qin heard that, he smiled and bowed. Then, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments waved his hand and 2 jade pendants in the shape of a yin and yang fish floated towards Xiao Qin and Qin Shi. "Even though this jade pendant isn't a treasure, it's been with me for many years. I'll give it to you," said the ruler of the 9 Firmaments Palace. The Pisces jade pendant looked ordinary, but if there were people present who knew about it, they would definitely go crazy. That was because these 2 jade pendants were carved from soul-nourishing jade. If one kept them by one's side all year round, they would have the effect of nourishing one's soul. Even though Xiao Qun and Qin Shuru hadn't reached the stage where they could cultivate their souls yet, if they had the soul-nourishing jade to nourish their souls, it would be extremely beneficial for them in the future. They hadn't thought that the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments would give them such precious gift. After giving the 2 fish jade pendants to Xiao Qin and Qin Shuru, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments said to Song Xian and the other 2, "In a month, people from 9 Firmaments Palace will come to pick you up. Besides, as the leaders of Celestial Sword Peak, your cultivation levels are still a bit low. You should break through as soon as possible. You need to at least reach the Dao transformation layer to be qualified to control a peak." After saying that, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments disappeared. Please add, recommend, reward. Chapter 95. After the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds left, Shao Chen ordered people to bring Shao Qing, Bai Ruye, Mo Jie, and Shao Qing back to the Qin clan. Without anyone from the 10,000 Immortals Tower stopping him, Shao Chen walked up to Qin Lai and said, "Uncle, Shui Rou and I love each other. I hope you can agree to our marriage." He had to marry Qin Shuru. Even Qin Lai couldn't stop him. When he heard Shao Chen's words, Qin Lai's expression became complicated. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Come with me." He probably had something he wanted to talk to Shao Chen about in private. When he heard this, he followed Qin Lai and the two of them quickly arrived at the study. Qin Lai gestured for Shao Chen to sit down, then slowly said, "You want to marry Shui Rou?" "Understood." Shao Chen nodded without hesitation after hearing Qin Lai's words. "Then can you guarantee that my Qin clan will return to the Central Divine Realm?" asked Qin Lai. The reason why Qin Lai had agreed to Mu Qing and Qin Shure's marriage was because he wanted the Qin clan to return to the Central Divine Realm. Now that Mu Qing had retreated and Shao Chen insisted on marrying Qin Shuru, Qin Lai knew that he had no right to refuse. After all, with Shao Chen's current status, if he wanted to force things, the Qin clan really couldn't stop him. Therefore, Qin Lai decided to place his hopes on Shao Chen. After all, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds favored Shao Chen. If Shao Chen could grow up safely, the Qin clan would indeed be able to return to the Central Divine Realm. Qin Lai truthfully told Shao Chen about the Qin clan. Furthermore, he only had one request. As long as Shao Chen agreed to help the Qin clan return to the Central Divine Realm in the future and destroy the Qin clan's enemies, Qin Lai would agree to the marriage between Shao Chen and Qin Shi. Shao Chen hadn't expected that the Qin family had once been a family clan of the Central Divine Realm. Originally, he could have refused Qin Lai's request. With his current status, even if he wanted to use force, what could Qin Lai do? However, on second thought, no matter what, Qin Lai was Qin Shure's father. Although Shao Chen had absolute confidence that Qin Shure would definitely follow him, Qin Shure would inevitably fall into a dilemma if that really happened. Not wanting to put Qin Shure in a difficult position, Shao Chen spoke up. "All right, I promise you." Qin Lai nodded and agreed to Qin Lai's request. Then, the two returned to the main hall. In front of everyone present, Qin Lai first expressed his apologies. Then, he said that he was old and blind and had taken all the blame. He also said that Shao Chen and Qin Shuru had already privately pledged to marry each other, and as their father, he chose to respect Qin Shuru's choice and agreed to the marriage between Shao Chen and Qin Shuru. After a series of hypocritical and far-fetched explanations, the wedding proceeded just like that. However, the groom changed from Mu Qing to Shao Chen. At the same time, Qin Shuru, who was originally against this wedding in every possible way, became incomparably obedient and his heart was filled with sweetness. He had never thought that he would marry Shao Chen, let alone that Shao Chen would actually marry him. In a daze, Qin Shuru and Shao Chen began the wedding ceremony. First, bow to heaven and earth. Second, bow to your parents. Husband and wife, bow to each other. After the entire complicated wedding process, the sky was completely dark. Qin Shuru was sent to the bridal chamber, while Shao Chen stayed outside to entertain the guests. It was late into the night. After arranging the guests, Shao Chen returned to the room. At this time, Qin Shuru's face was still covered by the red cloth. When he heard the door open, Qin Shuru's body visibly moved slightly. It was unknown whether he was nervous or not. His face was slightly red. However, alcohol had no effect on Shao Chen. He circulated the spiritual energy in his body and easily dispelled the alcohol in his body. Then, he walked slowly to Qin Shuru and gently lifted the red cloth covering his face. In just a few months, Qin Shuru had indeed changed a lot. He was more than 10 times more beautiful than before. Of course, Qin Shuru wasn't ugly in the past. But now, Qin Shuru was even more beautiful than before. Xiao Chen looked a little dazed. Feeling Xiao Chen's infatuated gaze, Qin Shuru blushed slightly. He was secretly delighted, but more than that, he felt shy. Blushing, Qin Shuru lowered his head and said coquettishly, "What are you looking at?" Qin Shuru's words brought Xiao Chen back to his senses. He smiled and said, "I'm looking at my wife. Senior sister, you're so beautiful today." Qin Shuru was so beautiful that one couldn't take their eyes off him. When Qin Shuru heard Xiao Chen call him wife, his face turned even redder. Just as Qin Shuru was feeling shy, Xiao Chen sat down beside him and gently pulled Qin Shuru into his arms. That night Qin Shuru was shy. When Xiao Chen woke up the next morning, he saw Qin Shuru's beautiful face looking at him with a sweet smile. Perhaps it was because of the crazy night, or perhaps because Qin Shuru had already decided to give himself to Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru wasn't as shy as before. His eyes were like a pair of crescent moons as he smiled at Xiao Chen. "Junior brother, please take care of me for the rest of my life. Senior sister too, please take care of me for the rest of my life as well," Xiao Chen replied with a smile after hearing Qin Shuru's words. They stayed on the bed until noon before Xiao Chen and Bai Ruiyue got up and washed up. Then, the two of them went to visit Qin Lai, Xiao Qing, and Bai Ruiyue. Xiao Chen was very calm when facing Qin Lai, but Qin Shuru couldn't help but feel nervous when facing Xiao Qing and Bai Ruiyue. Especially when he called them father and mother, Qin Shuru's face turned red again. On the other hand, Bai Ruiyue couldn't help but nod repeatedly when she saw Qin Shuru's shy face. It was obvious that she was very satisfied with Qin Shuru. In terms of appearance, Qin Shuru was definitely hundreds of streets ahead of Qin Muxue. The two of them weren't on the same level at all. It was the first time Bai Ruiyue had seen such a beautiful woman. She was like a fairy from heaven. Bai Ruiyue completely accepted Qin Shuru and didn't care about her shyness. She held her hand and started chatting. Under Bai Ruiyue's passionate attacks, Qin Shuru gradually relaxed. They stayed in the Qin residence for half a month. After half a month, Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru finally set off for the East Sword Pavilion. Since he had already married Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru naturally joined the East Sword Pavilion again. They rode the green feather eagle back to the East Sword Pavilion. Of course, little Qing also accompanied them. As for Mo Jie, he had already returned with Song Xian and the others. As for Xiao Qing and Bai Ruiyue, Xiao Chen had arranged for a sword pavilion elder to escort them back to Lingshan County City. Originally, Xiao Chen had planned to let the two elders go to the East Sword Pavilion together, but the two didn't agree. They had been away from home for so long and wanted to go back and take a look. After all, Xiao Qing was the head of the Xiao family, and there were many things in the family that he needed to handle. Please add recommend reward. Chapter 96. They returned to the East Sword Pavilion safely and stayed in the dustless residence as usual. When Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru, and little Qing returned to the dustless residence, Qing Yao and Qing Luo were already waiting for them at the door. Qing Yao and Qing Luo had been in charge of taking care of Xiao Chen ever since he entered the East Sword Pavilion's outer sect. When they saw Xiao Chen return, they first bowed to Xiao Chen and then to Qin Shuru. "Madam, the entire East Sun region knew about Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru's wedding, so Qing Yao and Qing Luo naturally addressed Qin Shuru as Madam." Qin Shuiro nodded her head graciously and walked into the dustless residence. She did not have any friendship with the two ladies. After half a month of getting along, Xiao Chen realized that not only did Qin Shuru's appearance improve tremendously, but his temperament also changed a lot. Apart from Xiao Chen, he was cold and indifferent to everyone else. The icy aura that he unconsciously emitted made people feel as though they were 1,000 miles away from him. Xiao Chen had also checked Qin Shuru's body, but there were no problems. In the end, she could only attribute it to the Yin spirit body. Perhaps it was because of the effects of the Yin spirit body after it was activated, Xiao Chun thought. In the following days, Xiao Chun and Qin Shuru stayed in the East Sword Pavilion to cultivate. What surprised Xiao Chun was that, after the Yin spirit body was activated, Qin Shuru's cultivation speed was ridiculously fast. It was not inferior to Xiao Chun's cultivation speed at all. Of course, if the heavenly sword embryo completed its transformation, Xiao Chun's cultivation speed would definitely skyrocket. When that time came, Qin Shuru might not be able to keep up with Xiao Chun's cultivation speed. As expected of a special constitution, Qin Shuru was greatly improved in all aspects after he activated the Yin spirit body. She concentrated on her cultivation and would occasionally visit Songxian. At the same time, Xiao Chun would also bring Qin Shuru back to Lingshan Prefecture City when he had time. After all, he had married a wife, and he had to introduce her to the elders in the family. Surprisingly, no one in the Xiao family objected to Qin Shuru's marriage. Instead, they were all in favor of him. Some of the Xiao clan's younger generation even regarded Qin Shuru as a celestial being. They even said that if they wanted to marry a wife in the future, they would look for a woman like Qin Shuru. However, these words were naturally mocked by the other Xiao clan's younger generation. Let alone the Dongyang region, there were not many women in the entire Tianshan continent who could compare to a beauty like Qin Shuru. In short, Qin Shuru had become the dream lover of the entire Xiao clan's younger generation. Of course, they could only watch helplessly. After all, Qin Shuru was Xiao Chen's wife. How could they dare to have any improper thoughts? What was worth mentioning here was that because of Xiao Chen, the younger generation of the Xiao clan, as long as their talent was not too bad, could basically enter the Eastern Sword Pavilion and become a servant disciple. Of course, whether or not they could become an outer disciple in the end would depend on their own effort. Even so, the Xiao clan's strength was rapidly growing. In just a few months, with the help of the East Sword Pavilion, the Xiao clan's strength had increased by dozens of times compared to before. There were no less than 10 Earth Mirror experts in the clan, and there were almost 100 mysterious Yuan experts. The only flaw was that the Xiao clan did not have a Heaven Realm expert. After all, Heaven Realm experts were rare in the Dongyang region. However, this was only temporary. With the cultivation resources provided by Xiao Chen, Xiao Qing and Bai Ryue had successfully broken through to the Earth Mirror. It was only a matter of time before they reached the Heaven Realm. It could be said that the Xiao clan had become the #1 aristocratic family in Lingfeng country. Even the imperial family of Lingfeng country did not dare to show the slightest disrespect to the Xiao clan. The current emperor was on equal footing with Xiao Qing. There was even a Xiao clan disciple who was engaged to the princess of the imperial family. The two families were preparing to become in-laws. Everything in the Xiao clan was developing in a good direction. This scene naturally made many of the Xiao clan's elders grin from ear to ear. Of course, they all knew that all of this was brought about by Xiao Chen. Without Xiao Chen, the Xiao clan would still be a small clan hiding in Lingshan County City. It was because they understood this that no one in the Xiao clan dared to go against Xiao Qing's word. No one dared to shake Xiao Qing's position as the head of the Xiao clan. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. In these 2 months, Xiao Chen's cultivation base had successfully broken through to the initial stage of the mystic Yin realm. Qin Shuero had also successfully broken through to the initial stage of the mystic Yin realm. Time passed day by day. The matter of the East Sword Pavilion returning to Nine Firmaments Palace was handled by the Zhangxian trio in an orderly manner. It had now reached the final stage. They did not plan to move the entire East Sword Pavilion to Nine Firmaments Palace. The Zhangxian trio's idea was to keep the East Sword Pavilion, while Nine Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak could become the destination for the disciples of the East Sword Pavilion. Once a disciple with decent talent reached the inner sect in the East Sword Pavilion, they would be able to head to the Heavenly Sword Peak to further their studies. As such, the Tsang Xian trio left behind 10 elders to oversee the East Sword Pavilion. In addition, the outer and inner sect disciples also stayed behind to guard the place. This time, only the core disciples would be brought to the Heavenly Sword Peak. The 3-month deadline was about to arrive. On this day, the experts of 9 Firmaments Palace finally arrived. The sky had just brightened when a loud eagle cry rang out from the horizon. Immediately after, the numerous disciples and elders raised their heads to look at the sky. Soon, over a dozen mountain-like golden-winged rocks flapped their wings and flew over from the horizon. Golden-winged rocks were Grade 5 demonic beasts, equivalent to human Tao querying experts. As expected of an overlord force, just their flying demonic beasts alone were comparable to Tao querying expert. Moreover, they had dispatched a total of 13 of them. The 13 golden-winged rocks flew to the sky above the East Sword Pavilion and slowly descended. Immediately after, a middle-aged man jumped down from the back of the golden-winged rock. He came before Tsang Xian trio and bowed. "Greetings, Peak Masters. This lowly one is called Chun Gang, the new elder of the Heavenly Sword Peak. I have come under the Palace Master's orders to welcome the 3 Peak Masters back to the Heavenly Sword Peak." Chun Gang had a Tao Gate cultivation base. His cultivation base was higher than Tsang Xian Trio's. However, his face was filled with respect. He had no choice. Tsang Xian Trio were Peak Masters while he was just an elder. He did not dare to be disrespectful to them. Hearing Chun Gang's words, Tsang Xian Trio did not act arrogantly. After all, his cultivation base was higher than theirs. They helped Chun Gang up with smiles on their faces and chatted casually for a while. Then, Tsang Xian instructed everyone to carry the things they were going to take away onto the golden-winged rock. In truth, there was no need to bring anything with them. Moreover, there were not many people heading to 9 Firmaments Palace this time. They decided to set off early tomorrow morning. Xiao Chun and Qin Shuru also began to pack their things. At the same time, Qin Yao and Qin Luo were also fortunate enough to be able to head to 9 Firmaments Palace together because of Xiao Chun. Please collect recommend reward. Chapter 97. Qin Luo and Qin Yao were not the only ones. Some outer and inner disciples with decent talent could also make an exception to head to 9 Firmaments Palace. Mo Jie and Qi Yen were one such example. The 2 of them could also head to 9 Firmaments Palace. There were also tens of outer and inner disciples who were qualified. Tomorrow they would set off for the divine region of the Middle Earth and 9 Firmaments Palace. For everyone, the divine region of the Middle Earth was an unfamiliar place. It made them yearn for it, but they also felt apprehensive. They yearned for it because the divine region of the Middle Earth was the center of the entire heavenly Chun mainland. Especially in terms of martial arts, it far surpassed the Eastern Sun region. Moreover, it was very vast. There were many things that the Eastern Sun region did not have there. Over there, they could come into contact with more profound martial arts knowledge. To put it simply, the only way to become a true expert was to go to the divine region of the Middle Earth. Therefore, everyone yearned for the divine region of the Middle Earth. As for the apprehension, it was because there were countless experts in the divine region of the Middle Earth. There were also countless geniuses there. Perhaps they could be considered geniuses in the Eastern Sun region, but in the divine region of the Middle Earth, they could only be considered average or even bottom-tier existences. With conflicted feelings, the night passed. Early the next morning, just as Xiao Chun and the others were about to leave, Mo Jie ran towards them as soon as they stepped out of the dustless residence. He looked a little flustered. "What's wrong?" Xiao Chun asked when he saw Mo Jie so flustered early in the morning. Faced with Xiao Chun's question, Mo Jie took a deep breath. Then, with a hesitant expression, he said, "Chun? There's news about Chun Ling. Today was the day they would head to 9 Firmaments Palace." However, just now, Mo Jie suddenly heard about Chun Ling. Knowing that Xiao Chun had been asking about Chun Ling, Mo Jie hurriedly ran over. Hearing this, Xiao Chen's expression changed slightly. He asked, "Where is he?" It had been more than 3 months since the incident in the 100 Spirits graveyard. In these 3 months, Xiao Chen had never given up trying to find out more about Chun Ling. However, it was as if this guy had vanished into thin air. There was no news from the East Sword Pavilion or the Blood Demon Hall. Now that he finally knew Chun Ling's whereabouts, Xiao Chen was naturally excited. Asked Mo Jie anxiously. Seeing that, Mo Jie hesitated. He didn't know whether he should tell Xiao Chen about it or not, but if he didn't tell Xiao Chen would definitely blame him if he found out about it. He was in a dilemma. Seeing that, Xiao Chen urged. In the end, Mo Jie had no choice but to tell Xiao Chen everything he knew. According to Mo Jie, there had been no news of Chun Ling for more than 3 months because Chun Ling had not left the 100 Spirits graveyard. In other words, after the 100 Spirits graveyard closed, Chun Ling had not been sent out. Instead, he had stayed in the 100 Spirits graveyard alone for more than 3 months. Something like this had never happened before. Just 3 days ago, Chun Ling had appeared at the burial grounds. At the entrance of the 100 Spirits graveyard, he was coincidentally seen by a disciple from the Myriad Immortal Tower. For a person to not be forcefully sent out from the 100 Spirits graveyard, the Myriad Immortal Tower disciple guessed that Chun Ling must have obtained some amazing inheritance or treasure. Thus, he wanted to snatch it away. However, not only did the disciple fail, but he was also killed by Chun Ling. After that, the matter became more and more serious. Everyone suspected that Chun Ling had obtained the greatest benefit from the 100 Spirits graveyard and knew the secret of the 100 Spirits graveyard. Therefore, many forces joined in to surround Chun Ling, including the Blood Demon Hall. There was nothing they could do about it. The 100 Spirits graveyard was simply too mysterious. The greatest inheritance within it was something everyone wanted to obtain. As such, Chun Ling became the target of everyone's pursuit. Hearing Mo Jie's words, Xiao Chen understood the whole story. A glint of determination flashed across his eyes. Without much hesitation, Xiao Chen turned to look at Qin Shuru and said, "You leave with Master and the others first. I will go to 9 Firmament's palace to find you." Chun Ling's current situation was very dangerous. Even the Blood Demon Hall had become greedy. Xiao Chen could not just sit by and do nothing. He did not have many friends by his side to begin with, and Chun Ling was definitely one of them. Although the time they spent together was not much, it was not an exaggeration to say that Chun Ling was definitely the person he liked the most. Therefore, Xiao Chen could not just watch as Chun Ling fell into a dangerous situation and not save him. "I'll go with you." Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shuru said, "No, you go with Master and the others. I'm only going to save him. Too many people will only get in the way. Be good, be good." After rejecting Qin Shuru's request, Xiao Chen kissed her forehead. Then, he summoned an azure feather eagle and disappeared into the horizon. Xiao Chen left alone with little Qin. After that, Qin Shuru informed Song Xian of the situation. After learning that Song Xian had everyone leave first while he chased after Xiao Chen, fearing that Xiao Chen would be in danger. Riding on the azure feather eagle, according to Mo Jie, Chun Ling was last seen in the outskirts of the All-Beast Mountain Range. As such, Xiao Chen naturally headed straight for the All-Beast Mountain Range. Without stopping for a moment, Xiao Chen arrived at the All-Beast Mountain Range in just 1.5 days. Looking down at the endless dense forest below, Xiao Chen whispered softly, "Where exactly are you?" The All-Beast Mountain Range covered an extremely large area. It was said that one could reach the central divine domain by passing through the All-Beast Mountain Range. However, it was almost impossible to pass through the All-Beast Mountain Range because it was said that there was a kingdom of demonic beasts at the core of the All-Beast Mountain Range. There were already beast kings that could transform into human form. Even Dao transformation realm experts wouldn't dare to trespass into the kingdom of demonic beasts. The outskirts of the All-Beast mountain range were not unfamiliar to Xiao Chen. After all, he had trained here for 5 months. He was thinking about where to find Chen Ling. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He thought of a place where Chen Ling was most likely to be. Jumping off the Azure Feather Eagle's back, Xiao Chen let the Azure Feather Eagle return to the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Bringing little Qin with him, Xiao Chen charged into the All-Beast mountain range. Rushing madly along the way, Xiao Chen sent messages through the forest. Along the way, he met many cultivators from different factions. They were probably all looking for Chen Ling's whereabouts. Without alerting the enemy, Xiao Chen avoided the crowd. After a night of rushing, Xiao Chen finally arrived at his destination. It was the cave where he and Chen Ling had stayed when they were training. After thinking about it, this should be the place where Chen Ling was most likely to be. Firstly, this place was well hidden. Only he and Chen Ling knew about it. Secondly, the exit of the entire All-Beast mountain range was surrounded. It was impossible for Chen Ling to leave the All-Beast mountain range. Therefore, it was very likely that he would choose to hide here. Looking at the familiar cave in front of him, it was as if he had returned to the time when the two of them were training. The crazy and absurd things of the past unconsciously surfaced. Please add, recommend, reward. Chapter 98. Xiao Chen, Motherf *Ker, come here quickly. There's a level 3 monster here, get it? Xiao Chen, we're rich. *CK, this is a heavenly spirit fruit. We're rich, we're really rich. Xiao Chen, *CK, your mother. Where are my underwear? Looking at the object reminded him of Chen Ling. His mind unconsciously recalled the time when he and Chen Ling were training in the Thousand Beast mountain range. He anxiously walked towards the cave and prayed in his heart. You bastard, please don't die. Walking quickly into the cave, just as Xiao Chen entered the cave, a blade flashed past. Seeing this, Xiao Chen hurriedly leaned to the side and narrowly dodged the blade. Then, he saw Chen Ling, who was covered in blood and holding a long blade, looking at Xiao Chen unsteadily. Still alive, I didn't come too late. Looking at Chen Ling, who was seriously injured but still alive, Xiao Chen unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. However, this relief only lasted for a moment. Soon, Xiao Chen felt that the current Chen Ling was completely different from before. The storage ring in his hand flashed, and the Scarlet Heaven sword was instantly unsheathed. The tip of the sword pointed at Chen Ling and said coldly, You're not Chen Ling. Who are you? Through his eyes, temperament, and intuition, Xiao Chen was sure that the Chen Ling in front of him was not Chen Ling. Or rather, he was not the Chen Ling from before. With Xiao Chen pointing the sword at him, Chen Ling's eyes flashed with a complicated look. He took the initiative to put down the long blade in his hand and sat on the ground. He said with some difficulty, I'm Chen Ling, but not the Chen Ling from before. He said a strange sentence. He did not expect Xiao Chen to appear here. Chen Ling's heart was extremely complicated. He did not know how to explain this to Xiao Chen. In the end, Chen Ling used the most direct method to tell Xiao Chen. According to Chen Ling, he was the reincarnation of an ancient almighty. However, he had not recovered the memories of his previous life. However, he had recovered them in the 100 Spirits graveyard. His previous life was the ancient almighty that had fallen in the 100 Spirits graveyard. It was also because of this that Chen Ling was not forcefully teleported out of the 100 Spirits graveyard. He told Xiao Chen everything that had happened to him. Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen let out a sigh of relief. The reincarnation of an ancient powerhouse was indeed a little. How should he put it? It was hard to accept. After explaining his situation, Chen Ling looked at Xiao Qing, who was coiled around Xiao Chen, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. However, he did not say anything. He then looked at Xiao Chen and said, I've finished. You can think that I'm no longer the Chen Ling from before. Also, what are you doing here? You want my legacy? Upon hearing this, Xiao Chun immediately sat down beside Chun Ling and scolded, Bullsh *t. Why would I want your trash legacy? I'm only here to see if you're dead so that I can collect your corpse. As he spoke, Xiao Chun took out 2 healing pills from his storage ring and handed them to Chun Ling. Upon seeing this, Chun Ling smiled and did not say anything. He swallowed them in one gulp. After swallowing the healing pills, Chun Ling began to heal his injuries. His injuries were indeed too severe. With such a body, it was impossible for the 2 of them to escape even if they wanted to. Therefore, the only thing they could do now was to heal his injuries first and think about other things later. Chun Ling closed his eyes and healed his injuries. Xiao Chun stood guard for him. He looked at Chun Ling, who had not changed much. He did not expect this guy to be the reincarnation of an ancient almighty. However, this was not important to Xiao Chun. As long as he was still Chun Ling, that was enough. With nothing to do, Xiao Chun took out the secret beast transformation manual that he had snatched from Chun Man and flipped through it. In fact, he had wanted to cultivate this secret technique for a long time. However, he had not been able to find a suitable demonic beast blood essence. After all, this beast transformation could only refine one type of demonic beast blood essence. Once it was refined, it could not be changed. This made Xiao Chun extremely conflicted. Xiao Chun did not want demonic beast blood essence that was too low level. Moreover, even if he cultivated it, the power of the beast transformation would be limited and would not be of much use. As for high-level demonic beast blood essence, Xiao Chun had no way of obtaining it. As a result, for over 3 months, although he had already memorized the beast transformation manual, he had not cultivated it. Flipping through it in boredom, according to Xiao Chun's thoughts, since this secret technique was so strange, it would at least require level 5 demonic beast blood essence. However, where could he find a level 5 demonic beast? Moreover, even if he could find one, how could he be a match for it? He felt helpless in his heart. However, at this moment, Chun Ling had unknowingly woken up. He snatched the beast transformation manual from Xiao Chun's hands and casually flipped through it. This secret technique is not bad. It is very strong. As long as there is enough demonic beast blood essence, this secret technique can be said to have no limit. Its strength is completely dependent on the level of the demonic beast blood essence. Even Chun Ling, who was the reincarnation of an ancient almighty, was full of praise after flipping through the beast transformation manual. However, after hearing his words, Xiao Chun unhappily replied, "You make it sound so simple. Where can I find high-level demonic beast blood essence? That's why I said that you don't know how lucky you are. Here, isn't this guy's demonic beast blood essence a treasure? Use it. I guarantee that you will not be disappointed." After hearing Xiao Chun's words, Chun Ling casually threw the beast transformation manual back to Xiao Chun. Then, he smiled and pointed at Little Green. "Use Little Green's blood essence." After hearing Chun Ling's words, Xiao Chun was also stunned. That's right, why didn't I think of that? However, after thinking about it, Little Green was only a level 2 demonic beast. How good could its blood essence be? He looked at Little Green doubtfully. Then, he turned his head and asked Chun Ling, "Do you know what kind of demonic beast Little Green is?" Previously, he had also looked through ancient books. However, it was a pity that there was no demonic beast that could match Little Green. Facing Xiao Chun's question, Chun Ling pretended to smile mysteriously and said, "Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Believe me, just use it. I guarantee that you will be satisfied." Chun Ling was unwilling to reveal it. Seeing this, Xiao Chun unhappily replied, "Have you heard of a saying? If you pretend to be something, you will be struck by lightning." Then let the storm come more violently, haha. Chun Ling laughed. Since Chun Ling was unwilling to say anything, Xiao Chun did not ask any more. He continued to look at Little Green. Xiao Chun smiled and said, "Little Green, can we discuss something?" Lend me 30 to 40 pounds of blood essence. Let me practice the secret technique. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, little Chen's eyes were filled with evil. It continuously retreated until it was forced into a corner by Xiao Chen. In the end, Little Green was unable to escape from Xiao Chen's evil claws. Grabbing Little Green, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry, I will be very gentle. I won't hurt you. Just a little will do." Little Green, you dare to bite me. Please collect, recommend, reward. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.